What if I told you that a single story, whispered by ancient Zen masters, could quiet the storm in your mind tonight? Over the next 3 hours, you're about to hear tales so profound that emperors abandoned their thrones just to understand them. If it feels right, let us know where you're listening from. There's something beautiful about hearts finding peace together across the globe. Settle in with whatever brings you comfort. These aren't just stories, they're 1,000-year-old medicines for modern anxiety, handed down through generations of wise teachers who discovered the secret to unshakable inner calm. Your journey to deep peace begins now. In ancient Japan, during a time when the old ways were crumbling and new ideas flooded in from the West, there lived a Zen master whose name was Nan-in. This was the Meiji era, beginning in 1868, when Japan opened its doors to the world after centuries of isolation. Emperors were losing power, samurai were laying down their swords, and everything that once seemed permanent was changing like leaves in autumn wind. Yet in this chaos, people still sought wisdom. A university professor, his mind buzzing with Western philosophy and scientific theories, came to visit Nan-in. He had heard whispers of something called Zen, a way of understanding that went beyond books and lectures. Nan-in welcomed him with a gentle smile and began preparing tea. The professor, unable to contain his excitement, immediately launched into a detailed explanation of his studies, his theories about consciousness, his interpretations of Eastern philosophy. Words poured from him like water from a broken dam. Nan-in listened patiently, nodding occasionally as he lifted the teapot. He poured tea into the professor's cup slowly, mindfully. The cup filled to the brim, but Nan-in kept pouring. Tea spilled over the edges, pooling on the wooden table, dripping onto the floor. The professor watched in growing alarm. "Master, stop. The cup is overflowing. No more tea can possibly fit." Nan-in set down the teapot and looked directly into the professor's eyes. "Like this cup," he said gently, "you are full of your own opinions and theories. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" In that moment, the professor understood something that no university had ever taught him. True learning requires emptiness, not the emptiness of ignorance, but the spaciousness of an open mind. This is what we call in Zen beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes, free from the weight of what we think we already know. During this same period, when the old Japan was dissolving into the new, wandering monks walked the mountain paths seeking truth. These mendicants owned nothing but their robes and begging bowls, depending entirely on the kindness of others. They embodied a tradition stretching back centuries, the belief that spiritual awakening comes not from comfort, but from complete surrender to life's uncertainty. One such monk was Gudo, who served as teacher to the emperor himself. Yet, despite his high position, he regularly left the palace to wander as a simple beggar. On one particular evening, rain fell in heavy sheets across the countryside. Gudo approached the small village of Takanaka, his straw sandals disintegrating with each step, his robes soaked through. At a humble farmhouse, he noticed several pairs of sandals drying in the window. When he knocked, a weary woman answered. Seeing his condition, she not only sold him dry sandals, but invited him to spend the night. Inside, Gudo immediately sensed the family's distress. The woman's eyes were red from crying, the children huddled quietly in the corner, and a heavy sadness filled the room like thick smoke. When Gudo asked what troubled them, the woman's story poured out. Her husband was a gambler and drunkard. When he won, he became violent in his celebrations. When he lost, he borrowed money they didn't have. Sometimes he disappeared for days, leaving them wondering if he was alive or dead. "I will help him," Gudo said simply. He gave the woman money and asked her to buy wine and food, then retire for the night. "I will wait here." Near midnight, the husband stumbled home, reeking of alcohol and defeat. "Wife," he bellowed, "bring me food." "I have food for you," came Gudo's calm voice from the shadows. "I was caught in the rain, and your generous wife offered me shelter. In gratitude, I bought wine and fish. Please, share them with me." The drunk man was delighted. He drank the wine and ate heartily, then collapsed onto the floor. Gudo sat beside him in meditation through the entire night, like a guardian watching over a troubled child. When morning came, the husband woke, with no memory of the previous evening. "Who are you?" he demanded, seeing the monk beside him. "I am Gudo of Kyoto, traveling to Edo," the monk replied peacefully. The man's face went white. Gudo, the emperor's own teacher. He had shared his table with one of the most revered masters in all of Japan. Shame crashed over him like a cold wave. "Master, please forgive me. I am not worthy of your presence." Gudo's eyes sparkled with compassion. "Everything in this life is impermanent," he said gently. "Life is brief. If you continue gambling and drinking, you will have no time for anything meaningful, and your family will continue to suffer. But this moment, this very moment, you can choose differently." The man began to weep. For the first time in years, he saw his life clearly. "How can I ever repay you for this teaching?" "Let me carry your things part of the way," the man insisted when Gudo prepared to leave. After 3 miles, Gudo told him to return home. "Just 5 more miles," the man begged. This happened again and again. The man couldn't bear to leave the presence of such unconditional acceptance. Finally, the man declared, "I will follow you for the rest of my life." True compassion, Zen teaches us, doesn't judge or lecture. It simply offers presence. Gudo could have scolded the drunkard, could have preached about the evils of gambling. Instead, he offered wine and companionship. Sometimes the most profound teaching happens not through words, but through the radical act of meeting someone exactly where they are. In the same region where Gudo wandered, another master named Hakuin lived a life of such genuine simplicity that he became legendary. Hakuin belonged to the Rinzai school of Zen, which emphasized sudden awakening through direct experience rather than gradual study. The Rinzai way was like lightning, sharp, immediate, illuminating. Near Hakuin's modest temple lived a family who ran a food store. Their teenage daughter was known throughout the village for her beauty and gentle manner. Then one day, she was discovered to be pregnant. Her parents were furious and demanded to know the father's identity. The girl remained silent for days, enduring their anger and disappointment. Finally, unable to bear the pressure any longer, she whispered a name, Hakuin. The parents stormed to the temple, their faces red with rage. "You have disgraced our daughter and brought shame upon our family. What do you have to say for yourself?" Hakuin looked at them with perfect calm. "Is that so?" he said quietly. Those three simple words, "Is that so?" contained the entire universe of Zen wisdom. Not denial, not argument, not even explanation. Just complete acceptance of what the moment was bringing. When the baby was born, the angry parents brought the child to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now." By this time, word had spread throughout the region. Hakuin's reputation as a holy man was completely destroyed. Students stopped coming to hear his teachings. Former admirers crossed the street to avoid him. Yet Hakuin showed no distress whatsoever. He took the baby tenderly in his arms. He begged milk from neighbors, found soft cloths for diapers, stayed awake through long nights when the infant cried. His care was so devoted, so completely without self-pity, that some began to whisper that perhaps they had misjudged him. A year passed. The young mother, tormented by guilt and unable to watch an innocent man suffer for her lie, finally confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young fishmonger she had been secretly meeting. The parents rushed back to Hakuin, their faces now burning with shame instead of anger. They apologized profusely, begged his forgiveness, and reached for the child. Hakuin handed over the baby without hesitation. His only words were exactly the same as before. "Is that so?" In Zen, we call this perfect equanimity, the mind that remains peaceful, whether receiving praise or blame, gain or loss. Hakuin had discovered what the Buddha taught, that our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our resistance to what happens. When we stop fighting reality, even false accusations become just another cloud passing through an endless sky. These three stories share a common thread that runs through all authentic spiritual wisdom. Whether it's emptying our cup of preconceptions, meeting others with radical acceptance, or remaining peaceful in the face of both praise and blame, they all point to the same truth. The peace we seek is not found by changing our circumstances, but by changing our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Notice how none of these masters tried to control their situations. Nanin didn't argue with the professor's theories. Gudo didn't lecture the gambling husband. Hakuin didn't defend himself against false accusations. Instead, they each responded with what we might call appropriate action, doing exactly what the moment called for, without the overlay of ego or agenda. This is the essence of Zen, not thinking your way to peace, but living your way there. Every moment offers us the same choice these masters made. We can meet life with an empty cup, an open heart, and a mind willing to say, "Is that so?" to whatever appears. In this simple acceptance, we discover the unshakable calm that has always been our true nature. In the bustling temple courtyards of ancient Japan, where the scent of incense mingled with the sound of wooden sandals on stone paths, the most profound lessons often came disguised as ordinary encounters. The master Bankei, whose teachings drew crowds from across the nation, discovered that true wisdom reveals itself not in grand proclamations, but in the quiet moments when our assumptions are gently overturned. Bankei belonged to no particular school of Zen. He taught what he called the unborn mind, the awareness that exists before thoughts arise. His talks were so popular that not only Zen students attended, but people from all walks of life, farmers, merchants, even priests from competing Buddhist sects. This diversity sometimes created tension, as different groups believed their approach to enlightenment was superior. One afternoon, as Bankei sat peacefully addressing a large gathering, a priest from the Nichiren sect pushed through the crowd. The Nichiren school emphasized devotion to the Lotus Sutra and could be quite militant in their approach. This particular priest was angry that his own followers had abandoned his temple to hear about Zen. "Wait just a minute," the priest called out loudly, disrupting the serene atmosphere. "Anyone who respects you will naturally obey what you say. But a man like myself does not respect you. Can you make me obey you?" The crowd murmured nervously. Here was a direct challenge to their beloved teacher. Many expected Bankei to engage in theological debate or demonstrate some miraculous power. Instead, Bankei smiled with genuine warmth. "Come up beside me and I will show you," he said gently. The priest, his pride now committed to the confrontation, pushed his way through the seated listeners to the front. He stood beside Bankei, arms crossed, waiting for whatever trick the Zen master might attempt. "Come over to my left side," Bankei requested pleasantly. Without thinking, the priest stepped to the left. "Actually," Bankei continued conversationally, "we might hear each other better if you were on my right side. Please step over here." Again, the priest complied automatically. Bankei's eyes twinkled with kindness. "You see," he observed gently, "you are obeying me perfectly. I think you are actually a very gentle person. Now please sit down and listen." The priest found himself sitting cross-legged on the ground, his anger completely dissolved. In less than a minute, without argument or force, Bankei had demonstrated something profound about human nature. Beneath our defensive postures and competitive attitudes lies a natural willingness to cooperate and learn. This story reveals what Buddhists call skillful means, the ability to respond to each situation with exactly the right approach. Bankei didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't match aggression with aggression. Instead, he met the priest's challenging energy with such disarming gentleness that the man's defensiveness simply melted away. In our daily lives, we encounter challenging people regularly: the difficult coworker, the argumentative family member, the stranger who cuts in line. Our usual response is to meet their energy with matching intensity. But Bankei shows us another way. What if we responded to aggression with curiosity, to demands with kindness, to challenges with genuine interest in the person behind the behavior? At the famous Kennen Temple in ancient Kyoto, where cherry blossoms fell like snow in spring and autumn maples painted the courtyards red and gold, lived a master named Mokurai, whose name meant silent thunder. True to his name, Mokurai was known for his powerful presence and his demanding teaching style. He never made things easy for his students, believing that authentic awakening required complete dedication. Among his many disciples was a 12-year-old boy named Toyo. Each morning and evening, Toyo watched the older students file into Mokurai's private room for Sanzen personal instruction sessions, where the master would give them koans, those puzzling questions designed to stop the ordinary thinking mind. These ancient riddles, passed down through generations of Zen masters, were like keys that could unlock doors the rational mind didn't even know existed. Toyo desperately wanted to participate in Sanzen. "Please, master," he begged Mokurai, "let me join the others." "You're too young," Mokurai replied. "Wait a few more years." But Toyo persisted with the determination that only children possess. Finally, Mokurai relented. "Very well, come this evening." That night, Toyo approached the master's room with trembling excitement. He struck the small gong to announce his presence, bowed 3 times as he had seen the others do, and entered. Sitting in formal posture before his teacher, he waited in respectful silence. Mokurai looked at the small boy seriously. "You know the sound of 2 hands clapping together," he said. "Now show me the sound of 1 hand." Toyo bowed and returned to his room, his mind spinning. What could be the sound of 1 hand? He sat by his window, listening to all the sounds of the night. Suddenly, he heard the distant music of geishas entertaining in the pleasure district. "Ah, I have it," he exclaimed. The next evening, when Mokurai asked him to demonstrate the sound of 1 hand, Toyo began playing an imaginary shamisen, imitating the geisha's music. No, Mokurai said firmly. "That will never do. That is not the sound of 1 hand. You haven't got it at all." Worried that the music might be too distracting, Toyo moved to a quieter part of the temple. Night after night, he meditated on this impossible puzzle. One evening, he heard water dripping from the roof into a wooden barrel. "That's it," he thought. When he demonstrated dripping sounds to Mokurai, the master shook his head. "What is that?" he asked. "That is the sound of dripping water, but not the sound of 1 hand. Try again." Month after month, Toyo returned with different sounds. The sighing of wind through pine trees, the hooting of an owl, the buzzing of cicadas. Each time, Mokurai rejected his answer. The sound of one hand is not the sound of wind, or owls, or insects. Try again. Nearly a year passed. Toyo's initial excitement had long since faded, replaced by something deeper, a genuine not knowing that wasn't desperate or frustrated, but open and attentive. He had exhausted all the sounds he could think of, all the clever solutions his mind could devise. Finally, sitting in meditation one quiet evening, something shifted. Toyo stopped trying to find the sound of one hand and simply rested in the silence before all sounds. In that moment of complete stillness, he understood. When he next appeared before Mokurai, the master asked as always, "What is the sound of one hand?" Toyo remained perfectly silent. Mokurai smiled for the first time in their many months of meetings. "You have heard the sound of one hand," he said softly. What Toyo discovered in that moment of silent understanding is what Zen calls direct pointing, the recognition that reality cannot be captured in concepts or sounds or explanations. The sound of one hand is the sound of no sound. The awareness that exists before our mind divides experience into this and that, self and other, problem and solution. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this story is how it reveals the nature of authentic learning. Toyo didn't solve the koan through cleverness or study. He solved it by exhausting his cleverness, by moving beyond his small self's need to have the right answer. In Zen, we call this great doubt, the willingness to not know so completely that wisdom can finally emerge. True humility, these stories teach us, isn't about thinking less of ourselves. It's about thinking of ourselves less. When the Nichiren priest stopped defending his position, he could finally hear Bankei's teaching. When Toyo stopped trying to be clever, he could hear the soundless sound. When we let go of our need to be right, to be special, to already understand, we create space for genuine discovery. The Buddha once said, "The whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you. Depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed." This doesn't mean we should be isolated or prideful. It means we should approach each moment with the fresh openness of Toyo before he knew any sounds, the receptive emptiness of Nanin's cup before any tea was poured. In our achievement-oriented world, this kind of not knowing can feel uncomfortable. We're trained to have opinions, to be experts, to demonstrate our knowledge. But these ancient stories whisper a different possibility. What if our greatest wisdom lies not in what we know, but in our willingness to be surprised? What if the most profound learning happens when we approach each day like a 12-year-old boy hearing an impossible riddle for the first time? Every morning offers us the same choice these masters made. We can meet the day with our cups already full of expectations and assumptions, or we can empty them and see what fresh understanding wants to pour in. In this beginner's mind, we discover that every moment is our teacher, every encounter a chance to learn something we never knew, we needed to know. Deep in the mountains of ancient China, where mist clung to pine trees like whispered prayers and streams carved their patient way through stone, there lived an old woman whose story would challenge everything we think we know about compassion. For over 20 years, this woman had supported a solitary monk, building him a small hut with her own hands and bringing him food daily while he devoted himself to meditation. In those days, it was considered a great merit to support a spiritual practitioner. Buddhist communities understood that some individuals needed to withdraw from worldly concerns entirely in order to pursue awakening, and lay people gained spiritual benefit by making such dedication possible. This ancient tradition, called dana in Sanskrit, represented one of the fundamental practices of Buddhist life: generous giving without expectation of return. But after 2 decades of selfless support, the old woman began to wonder, what progress had this monk actually made? Had her years of sacrifice helped him achieve any genuine understanding, or had she simply been enabling spiritual stagnation? To find out, she devised a test. She approached a young woman from the village, someone known for her beauty and warmth. "Go to the monk's hut," the old woman instructed. "Embrace him suddenly and ask him what he intends to do about it. Then, return and tell me exactly what happens." The young woman agreed and made her way to the remote hut. She found the monk deep in meditation, his back straight, his breathing steady. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around him and pressed close, asking in a soft voice, "What now, Master? What will you do?" The monk's response was immediate and cold. Pushing her away, he replied in a detached, poetic tone, "An old tree grows on a cold rock in winter. Nowhere is there any warmth." When the young woman reported these words to the old woman, the benefactor's face darkened with disappointment and anger. "To think I fed that fellow for 20 years, she exclaimed. "He showed no consideration for your situation, no kindness toward your humanity. He didn't need to respond to passion, but he should have shown at least some compassion." That very day, the old woman marched to the monk's hut and burned it to the ground. This shocking story reveals something profound about the difference between detachment and compassion in authentic spiritual practice. The monk had achieved a kind of emotional numbness, mistaking coldness for wisdom. True Zen awakening, however, doesn't make us less human. It makes us more fully human. The enlightened heart responds to each situation with appropriate feeling, not with calculated indifference. What the old woman understood, and what the monk had missed, is that genuine spiritual maturity includes what Buddhists call skillful compassion, the ability to meet each being exactly where they are, without judgment, but with genuine care. The young woman wasn't seeking seduction. She was simply being used as a messenger. A truly awakened person would have recognized her humanity and responded with kindness, even while maintaining appropriate boundaries. In medieval Japan, within the walls of Buddhist convents where women pursued the same rigorous training as their male counterparts, lived a nun named Eshun. The life of a Buddhist nun required tremendous courage in a society that offered women few alternatives to marriage and motherhood. These women shaved their heads, took vows of celibacy, and dedicated themselves completely to the pursuit of enlightenment. Eshun was known throughout her convent for her sincerity and depth of practice. Despite her shaved head and plain robes, her inner beauty and spiritual presence were unmistakable. Several of the monks who visited the convent for joint meditation sessions found themselves drawn to her, though they struggled with feelings that conflicted with their religious vows. One monk, unable to contain his infatuation, wrote Eshun a passionate love letter. In it, he poured out his feelings and requested a secret meeting. Such correspondence was strictly forbidden in monastic communities, and discovery could lead to severe punishment or expulsion. When Eshun received the letter, she read it quietly and set it aside without response. She neither encouraged the monk nor reported him to the authorities. She simply continued her practice, as if nothing had happened. The following day, the master of the temple gave his regular lecture to the assembled monks and nuns. When he finished speaking and asked if there were any questions, Eshun rose gracefully to her feet. In clear voice that carried across the silent hall, she addressed the monk who had written to her, "If you really love me so much, come and embrace me now." The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs. The monk who had written the letter turned bright red, his secret exposed before the entire community. But rather than creating scandal, Eshun's bold honesty created clarity. By bringing the hidden into the light, she had shown both the monk and the community something essential about authentic, spiritual life. True practice doesn't ignore difficult emotions or pretend they don't exist. Instead, it meets them with such direct honesty that they lose their power to create suffering. What Eshun demonstrated is what Zen calls direct pointing, cutting through pretense and confusion with the sword of truth. Her challenge wasn't cruel, it was compassionate. She offered the infatuated monk a moment of such clarity that he could see his own delusion. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is to hold up a mirror that shows them reality without the stories they've been telling themselves. In a small hut at the foot of Mount Fuji, where snow-capped peaks reflected in still mountain lakes and cherry blossoms bloomed briefly each spring like reminders of life's precious impermanence, lived a Zen master named Ryokan. Unlike many teachers who gathered disciples and established grand temples, Ryokan chose the path of radical simplicity. He owned virtually nothing: a few robes, a wooden bowl, some calligraphy brushes, and books of poetry. Ryokan embodied what Buddhists call voluntary poverty, not the poverty of lack, but the richness of needing nothing. His days were spent in meditation, writing poetry, and playing with village children who were drawn to his gentle, playful nature. Despite having no possessions worth stealing, his hut stood unlocked, open to all who might need shelter. One evening, Ryokan returned from a walk to find a thief searching through his meager belongings. The man looked up in alarm, expecting anger or calls for help. Instead, Ryokan smiled with genuine warmth. "You may have come a long way to visit me," he said kindly. "You should not return empty-handed. Please, take my clothes as a gift." The thief was completely bewildered. He had prepared for confrontation, pursuit, perhaps violence, But this response, treating him as an honored guest rather than a criminal, left him speechless. Ryokan began removing his outer robe, then his under kimono, folding each piece neatly and placing them in the thief's hands. "Please," he insisted gently, "I want you to have these." The confused thief gathered up the clothes and fled into the night, leaving Ryokan sitting naked under the stars. Rather than feeling violated or angry, the master gazed up at the full moon with pure appreciation. "Poor fellow," he murmured with genuine compassion. "I wish I could give him this beautiful moon as well." This story captures the essence of what Buddhists call unconditional generosity, giving that flows from abundance of spirit rather than calculation of benefit. Ryokan didn't give his clothes to reform the thief or to demonstrate his own virtue. He gave them because, in that moment, giving felt like the most natural response to someone in need. Notice that Ryokan's compassion extended beyond the thief to include genuine sadness that he couldn't share the moon's beauty. This reveals the heart of enlightened awareness, the recognition that all beings are seeking the same fundamental happiness, though most of us look for it in the wrong places. The thief sought security through possessions. Ryokan had found it through letting go of the need to possess anything. What all three of these stories reveal is that genuine compassion requires wisdom. It's not enough to be kind, we must be skillfully kind. The old woman showed tough love by burning down the monk's hut, forcing him to confront his spiritual stagnation. Eshun showed fierce compassion by exposing hidden delusions to the light of truth. Ryokan showed unconditional love by meeting a thief with the same warmth he would offer any visitor. In each case, these awakened beings responded not from rule or concept, but from deep attunement to what each moment actually required. They had learned what the Buddha taught, that authentic compassion sometimes looks harsh and sometimes looks gentle, but it always serves the deepest well-being of all involved. In our daily lives, we face countless opportunities to practice this kind of wise compassion. When someone cuts in line, do we respond with irritation or with curiosity about what urgency might be driving them? When a loved one makes the same mistake repeatedly, do we enable their patterns or challenge them with loving honesty? When someone takes advantage of our generosity, do we close our hearts or find new ways to give that truly serve? These ancient stories whisper the same truth. Genuine understanding begins when we stop seeing others as obstacles to our happiness and start recognizing them as fellow travelers on the path of awakening. Every person we meet is seeking peace, love, and freedom from suffering. When we respond to their seeking with the same wisdom that recognizes our own deepest longing, compassion flows naturally. This is the understanding that transforms not only our relationships, but our very experience of being alive. In the bustling port cities of Meiji-era Japan, where Western influence mixed with ancient traditions like tea, stirred into clear water, there lived a man whose profession required both immense physical strength and unshakable mental courage. His name was Anami, which means great waves, and he was a sumo wrestler of extraordinary ability. Sumo wrestling in 19th century Japan was far more than sport. It was a sacred ritual, connecting participants to Shinto beliefs about purity, strength, and the divine forces of nature. Wrestlers weren't merely athletes. They were spiritual warriors who channeled the power of earth and sky through their bodies. The greatest champions were revered like living gods, their victories celebrated in poetry and art. Onami possessed all the physical gifts necessary for greatness. His massive frame moved with surprising grace, his technique was flawless, and his understanding of wrestling strategy was so profound that he regularly defeated even his own teacher in private practice sessions. Yet despite these abilities, Onami faced a problem that tormented him day and night. The moment he stepped into the ring before a crowd, his courage completely disappeared. His hands would tremble, his breathing would become shallow, and his mind would fill with paralyzing self-doubt. Students who could barely challenge him in private would throw him easily when spectators were watching. The man whose name meant great waves became as timid as a small child, afraid of water. Wrestling matches in public arenas drew hundreds of shouting spectators, their voices creating a thunderous wall of sound that seemed to crush Onami's spirit. The more people watched, the smaller he felt. His reputation began to suffer, and with it, his ability to support himself through his craft. Desperate for help, Onami decided to seek guidance from a Zen master. He had heard that these teachers possessed insights into the workings of the mind that could free people from their deepest fears. Near his training grounds stood a small temple where a wandering master named Hakuju was temporarily staying. Onami approached the temple one evening, his massive frame making him seem almost comical as he tried to bow gracefully in the cramped space. He poured out his story to Hakuju, how his strength abandoned him the moment he faced a crowd, how his reputation was crumbling, how he feared he might never achieve his potential. Hakuju listened with the patience of someone who had heard similar stories many times before. When Onami finished speaking, the master looked at him thoughtfully. "Great Waves is your name," he said simply. "So tonight, stay here, in this temple, and imagine that you are those great waves." The instructions seemed almost childishly simple. "You are no longer a wrestler who is afraid," Hakuju continued. "You are those huge waves that sweep everything before them, swallowing all obstacles in their path. Do this visualization completely, and you will become the greatest wrestler in the land." After the master retired to his quarters, Onami sat alone in the temple's meditation hall. The space was dimly lit by flickering candles, and shadows danced on the walls like spirits from another world. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine himself as waves, but his mind kept returning to his fears about upcoming matches. At first, his visualization was weak and scattered. He thought about his wrestling technique, his opponent's strategies, his need to win matches to survive financially. But gradually, as the night deepened and the temple grew quieter, something began to shift in his awareness. He started to feel the power of oceanic waves, not as something he was imagining, but as something he was becoming. The sensation began in his belly, a rolling, surging energy that seemed to have its own rhythm and intelligence. As he surrendered more completely to this inner movement, the waves grew larger and more powerful. In his mind's eye, he saw himself as a massive wall of water rising from the depths of the sea. Nothing could stop these waves, not rocks, not beaches, not human structures. They moved with the irresistible force of nature itself, beyond fear or doubt or self-consciousness. As the night progressed, Onami's visualization became more vivid and consuming. The waves in his imagination swept away the temple's flower arrangements, crashed over the Buddha statue, and filled the entire building with rushing water. By dawn, in his vision, the temple had become nothing but the endless ebb and flow of an immense sea. When Hakuju found him the next morning, Onami was still sitting in meditation, a faint smile playing on his lips. The master approached quietly and touched the wrestler's shoulder. "Now nothing can disturb you," he said softly. "You are those waves. You will sweep everything before you." That very day, a wrestling tournament was scheduled in the city. Onami entered the competition with a sense of calm he had never experienced before. When he stepped into the ring, instead of seeing a crowd of judging faces, he felt the unstoppable power of great waves moving through his body. He won every match that day with such ease that spectators spoke of his performance for years afterward. From that moment forward, no wrestler in all of Japan could defeat him. Onami had discovered what Zen teaches about the relationship between mind and reality. When we truly embody our deepest nature, external circumstances lose their power to limit us. This transformation illustrates a fundamental principle of Buddhist psychology. What we call fear is often just the gap between who we think we are and who we actually are. Onami's problem wasn't lack of skill or strength. It was identification with a small, separate self that could be threatened by others' opinions. When he discovered his connection to something vast and unshakable, fear naturally disappeared. During the late Tokugawa period, when Japan was still isolated from the Western world and ancient traditions remained undisturbed by foreign influence, there lived a Zen master named Hoshin, whose insight into the nature of life and death had become legendary throughout the northeastern provinces. Hoshin had spent many years studying in China, absorbing the purest transmissions of Zen wisdom before returning to teach in his homeland. As Hoshin grew older, his students began to worry about losing their beloved teacher. Masters of his caliber were rare, and his particular combination of profound understanding and gentle humor had touched many lives. They couldn't bear the thought of his eventual departure from this world. One winter day, when Hoshin was quite elderly, he gathered his disciples around him. Snow was falling softly outside the temple windows, and the air held that special quietness that comes with approaching winter. "I want to tell you a story I heard while studying in China," he said, settling himself comfortably before the group. "Many years ago," Hoshin began, "there was an old master named Tokufu who on December 25th called his students together. 'I will not be alive next year,' he told them calmly. 'So you should treat me especially well during these remaining days.' The disciples thought their teacher was joking. Tokufu seemed healthy and strong, with no signs of illness. But because they loved him, each student took turns preparing special meals for him during the final days of the year. On New Year's Eve, Hoshin continued, Tokufu announced to his students, "You have been wonderfully kind to me. Tomorrow afternoon, when the snow stops falling, I will leave you." Again, the disciples laughed, thinking he was speaking metaphorically about some journey he planned to take. The night was clear and cloudless. There was no snow in sight. But at midnight, snow began to fall, and by morning it was coming down steadily. The next day, Hoshin said, the students couldn't find their teacher anywhere in the temple. They searched his room, the meditation hall, the gardens. Finally, they discovered him in the main hall, sitting in perfect meditation posture. He had passed away peacefully during the morning, just as the snow was stopping. When Hoshin finished this story, one of his students asked, "Master, is it really possible for someone to know the time of their own death?" "It's not necessary for a Zen teacher to predict such things," Hoshin replied thoughtfully. "But if one truly wishes to demonstrate this ability, it can be done. Would you like me to show you?" The students were uncertain whether he was serious. "Yes," one of them said hesitantly. "Show us what you mean." Hoshin smiled gently. 7 days from now, I will join my teacher Tokufu." Most of the disciples didn't believe him. By the end of the week, many had forgotten the conversation entirely. Hoshin seemed perfectly healthy, continuing his daily routines without any sign of distress. On the 7th day, Hoshin called everyone together. 7 days ago, he reminded them, I said I would be leaving today. It's customary for departing masters to write a death poem, but I am neither a poet nor a skilled calligrapher. Will one of you please write down my final words? The students still thought he might be joking, but one of them picked up brush and ink. Are you ready? Hoshin asked. Yes, master, the student replied. Hoshin closed his eyes and spoke slowly. I came from brilliancy and returned to brilliancy. What is this? The student finished writing and looked up. Master, traditional death poems have 4 lines. This is only 3. With a roar like a conquering lion, Hoshin shouted, What is this? And immediately passed away. This remarkable story reveals something profound about the Zen understanding of life and death. For most of us, death represents the ultimate unknown, the final threat to our sense of control. But for someone who has truly awakened to their essential nature, death is simply another change in an endless process of transformation. Hoshin's final shout, What is this? Wasn't a question born of confusion. It was the ultimate Zen expression, pointing directly to the mystery that underlies all experience. In that moment, he was asking not just about death, but about the entire inexplicable miracle of existence itself. What these stories of Onami and Hoshin share is a recognition that our ordinary sense of limitation comes from identification with something too small. Onami thought he was just a nervous wrestler. Hoshin's students thought he was just a mortal teacher. But both discovered their connection to something vast and eternal, Whether we call it great waves, brilliant awareness, or simply, what is this? The Buddha taught that this recognition is available to everyone. Look within, he said. You are the Buddha. Not because we need to become something special, but because we need to recognize the specialness that has always been our true nature. In our daily lives, we face countless opportunities to remember this larger identity. When anxiety arises before an important presentation, we can ask, what great waves want to move through me? When we feel small and insignificant, we can inquire, from what brilliancy did I come? When life seems overwhelming, we can wonder with genuine curiosity, what is this mysterious experience I'm having? The wisdom in these simple stories isn't complicated philosophy, requiring years of study. It's the direct recognition that we are far more than our fearful thoughts, far greater than our temporary circumstances, far deeper than our surface personality. When we touch this understanding, even briefly, life becomes an adventure rather than a problem. Like Onami discovering his wave nature, like Hoshin recognizing his brilliant essence, we can learn to identify with the vast, peaceful awareness that watches all our experiences come and go. This awareness isn't afraid of crowds or death or change. It simply witnesses everything with the calm stability of the ocean depths, unmoved by whatever storms may rage on the surface. In this recognition, we find the unshakable peace that is our birthright. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, where temples rose like prayers carved in wood and stone, and where the changing seasons painted the city in endless cycles of beauty and loss, there lived a woman whose story would become one of the most heartbreaking and instructive tales in all of Zen literature. Her birth name was Suzu, meaning bell, but she would later take the name Shunkai, which means spring ocean, a name that would prove both prophetic and tragic. Shunkai was born in the 1800s, during a time when women had few choices beyond marriage and motherhood. Yet she possessed a rare combination of extraordinary beauty and brilliant intellect that set her apart from her contemporaries. Her features were so exquisite that people would stop in the street to watch her pass, and her mind was so sharp that even learned scholars sought her conversation. Against her wishes, Shunkai was forced into an arranged marriage while still quite young. This was the fate of most women in feudal Japan, where individual desires mattered little compared to family obligations and social expectations. Yet even in this constrained circumstance, her spirit refused to be diminished. When her unhappy marriage finally ended, Shunkai made a radical decision. She enrolled at the Imperial University to study philosophy, becoming one of the first women to pursue higher education in Japan. Her beauty and intelligence made her a sensation in academic circles, but also created complications she had not anticipated. Wherever Shunkai went, men fell in love with her. At the university, among fellow students and professors, in the temples she visited to study Buddhism, everywhere she appeared, she left a trail of infatuated admirers. But what made her situation even more complex was that she herself fell in love easily and often. When philosophy failed to satisfy her deepest longings, Shunkai turned to Zen Buddhism, she began visiting temples, seeking something beyond intellectual understanding. At a sub-temple of the famous Kenninji monastery, she finally found what she was looking for, not just Buddhist teachings, but authentic spiritual community. The monks at Kenninji recognized Shunkai's sincere dedication to awakening. Despite the complications her beauty created, they accepted her as a genuine student. One monk in particular, a learned and compassionate teacher, became her guide in mastering the subtle points of Zen practice. The abbot of Kenninji was Mokurai, whose name meant silent thunder. True to his name, Mokurai was known for his fierce dedication to maintaining proper monastic discipline. He had observed how the traditional boundaries between monks and lay people were becoming blurred in modern Japan, and he was determined to preserve the purity of monastic life. Mokurai's strict standards created enemies, particularly among the wives of priests who resented his interference in their domestic arrangements. The head priest's wife was especially threatened by Shunkai's obvious spiritual gifts and the attention she received from the monks. Jealousy and resentment began to poison the temple atmosphere. Unable to bear watching Shunkai's spiritual progress and growing influence, the priest's wife began spreading malicious rumors. She suggested that Shunkai's relationship with her monk teacher was improper, that her beauty was a corrupting influence on the monastery. These whispers eventually reached Mokurai's ears, and he was forced to take action. Without investigating the accusations thoroughly, Mokurai expelled both Shunkai and her teacher from the monastery. The monk was banished in disgrace, his years of sincere practice seemingly erased by unfounded suspicions. Shunkai was devastated not only by her own rejection, but by the injustice done to an innocent teacher. "I may have made the mistake of love," Shunkai thought bitterly, "but if my friend is to be treated so unjustly, then his accuser shall not remain in this temple either." That night, driven by a mixture of heartbreak and righteous anger, Shunkai took a can of kerosene and set fire to the 500-year-old temple. The ancient wooden structure, home to centuries of prayer and meditation, burned to the ground. By morning, Shunkai was in the hands of the police. A young lawyer, moved by her story and her obvious suffering, tried to arrange a lighter sentence. But Shunkai refused his help. "Don't try to save me," she told him. "I might decide to do something else that would only land me in prison again." She served 7 years in prison, where even the 60-year-old warden became infatuated with her enduring beauty. But when she was finally released, Shunkai discovered that the world had no place for a woman with her history. Even progressive Buddhists, who claimed to believe in redemption and enlightenment in this very lifetime, turned away from her. Her own family disowned her completely. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. No respectable person would associate with someone who had burned down a sacred temple. Shunkai found herself alone, poor, and increasingly ill. In her darkest hour, she encountered a Shin Buddhist priest who taught her about Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light and compassion. In this teaching of unconditional acceptance and boundless love, Shunkai finally found some measure of peace. She began chanting the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, calling on the Buddha's compassion to heal her broken heart. Shunkai died young, still beautiful, but worn down by suffering and social rejection. Before her death, she wrote her own story, hoping that sharing her experience might prevent others from making similar mistakes. After she passed away, the same people who had shunned and condemned her read her account with tears of remorse. Shunkai's tragedy illustrates what Buddhists call the suffering that comes from attachment, not just attachment to things or outcomes, but attachment to how we think our lives should unfold. Her beauty, which seemed like a gift, became a source of endless complications. Her passionate nature, which made her an extraordinary student of philosophy and Buddhism, also led to her downfall. Most tragically, her attachment to justice, her inability to accept unfair treatment, drove her to an act of destruction that ruined multiple lives. Yet within this sad story lies a profound teaching about the nature of true freedom. Freedom doesn't come from getting what we want or avoiding what we don't want. It comes from developing what the Buddha called equanimity, the ability to remain peaceful whether circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. During the same Meiji period when Shunkai's drama was unfolding, two Buddhist teachers in Tokyo demonstrated completely different approaches to spiritual discipline. Their contrasting styles would illuminate another aspect of attachment and freedom. One was named Unsho, the other Tanzan, and their relationship revealed the difference between rigid adherence to rules and genuine spiritual understanding. Unsho was a Shingon Buddhist priest who followed every traditional precept with scrupulous exactness. He never drank alcohol, never ate after 11 in the morning, and maintained all the ritual purifications prescribed by ancient texts. His dedication to formal discipline was so complete that other priests looked to him as a model of proper religious behavior. Tanzan, in contrast, was a philosophy professor at the Imperial University who seemed to ignore traditional Buddhist rules entirely. When he felt hungry, he ate, regardless of the time. When he felt tired during the day, he napped. When friends offered him wine, he drank it gladly. One afternoon, Unsho decided to visit his old friend Tanzan. He arrived to find Tanzan enjoying a cup of rice wine, which according to Buddhist precepts, should never touch the lips of a practicing Buddhist. Unsho was shocked and dismayed. "Hello, brother," Tanzan greeted him cheerfully. "Won't you join me for a drink?" "I never drink," Unsho replied with obvious disapproval. "It's against our vows." Tanzan looked at his friend with twinkling eyes. "But someone who doesn't drink isn't even human," he said playfully. "Are you telling me you're not human?" This comment struck Unsho as deeply insulting. "Do you mean to call me inhuman just because I follow the Buddha's teachings about intoxicants?" he demanded angrily. "Well then," Tanzan replied with a gentle smile, "if you're not human, what are you?" "I am a Buddha," Unsho answered, intending to put his irreverent friend in his place. "Exactly," Tanzan exclaimed with delight. "You understand perfectly." This exchange reveals something profound about the nature of attachment to spiritual rules and practices. Unsho had become so identified with being a good Buddhist that he had forgotten the purpose of Buddhist practice, to awaken to our true nature. Tanzan, despite his apparent disregard for formal precepts, had recognized the essential point: we are already what we seek to become. True freedom, these stories suggest, isn't found in following rules perfectly or in breaking them deliberately. It's found in understanding why the rules exist and responding appropriately to each situation. Sometimes appropriate action means strict discipline. Sometimes it means flexibility. What matters is not the outer form, but the inner understanding. In a quiet temple in rural Japan, there lived a monk named Showan, whose story would illustrate yet another dimension of attachment and freedom. Showan had become a Zen teacher while still quite young, but unlike many monks who left their families behind when they took vows, he faced an unusual situation. When his father died, Showan became responsible for caring for his elderly mother. Most Buddhist monasteries were exclusively male communities where women were not permitted to live. But Showan couldn't abandon his mother, nor could he abandon his calling as a Buddhist teacher. So he made an unconventional choice. Wherever he went to teach, he brought his mother with him. This arrangement created constant difficulties. Because his mother lived with him, Showan couldn't stay in traditional monasteries. Instead, he had to build small houses wherever he taught, creating a home for both his spiritual practice and his filial duty. To support themselves, Showan copied Buddhist sutras by hand, selling his beautiful calligraphy to earn money for food and shelter. When his mother expressed a desire to eat fish, forbidden for monks, Showan would buy it for her, without hesitation. Other Buddhists criticized him for this apparent violation of monastic rules, but Showan paid no attention to their disapproval. His mother, seeing how others judged her son, felt terrible guilt about the compromises he was making for her sake. "I think I should become a nun," she told him one day. "Then I can be a vegetarian too, and people won't criticize you." She did indeed become a nun, and they practiced together happily for many years. Both mother and son were accomplished musicians. Showan played the harp beautifully, and his mother had learned the instrument as well. On nights when the moon was full, they would play duets together, their music floating across the countryside, like prayers made audible. One evening, a young woman passed by their modest dwelling and heard the ethereal music. Deeply moved by its beauty, she invited Showan to visit her home the following night to play for her family. Showan accepted the invitation graciously. A few days later, when Showan encountered the woman on the street, he thanked her politely for her hospitality. Others who witnessed this exchange began to gossip. They discovered that the woman worked in the pleasure district, and they condemned Showan for associating with someone they considered immoral. When Showan left on a teaching journey to a distant temple, his mother fell ill and died while he was away. By the time word reached him, friends had already begun the funeral preparations. Showan arrived just as the ceremony was beginning. Walking directly to his mother's coffin, Showan struck it gently with his staff. "Mother," he said aloud, "your son has returned." From within the coffin came a voice, his own voice, but speaking as his mother. "Yes, "I'm glad to see you've come back safely, my son." "I'm glad too," Showan replied, speaking as himself again. Then he announced to the assembled mourners, "The funeral ceremony is complete. You may bury the body now." When Showan himself was nearing death years later, he gathered his students and announced that he would pass away at noon. He burned incense before images of his mother and his first teacher, then composed a death poem. "For 56 years I lived as best I could, making my way in this world. Now the rain has ended, the clouds are clearing, and the blue sky has a full moon." As his disciples chanted sutras around him, Showan peacefully left his body. Showan's life demonstrates that true spiritual freedom sometimes requires us to break conventional rules in service of deeper principles. His attachment to his mother might seem like a limitation to strict monastics, but it actually freed him to express compassion in ways that pure rule-following could never achieve. By choosing love over convention, care over criticism, he found a path that honored both his spiritual calling and his human responsibilities. What all these stories reveal is that attachment and freedom are not opposites, but dance partners in the grand choreography of awakening. Shunkai's attachment to justice led to destruction, but her final attachment to Amida Buddha's compassion brought peace. Unsho's attachment to rules blinded him to their purpose, while Tanzen's freedom from rules revealed their essence. Showan's attachment to his mother became a vehicle for expressing unconditional love. The Buddha taught that the middle way lies not in having no attachments, but in holding our attachments lightly. We can love deeply without grasping desperately. We can care passionately without demanding that outcomes match our preferences. We can commit fully to our values while remaining flexible about how they express themselves. This is the freedom that comes not from having nothing to lose, but from recognizing that everything we have is already a gift. When we understand this, we can embrace life fully while holding it gently, like a butterfly that will fly away the moment we try to capture it permanently. In this delicate balance between love and letting go, we discover the peace that passes all understanding. In the mountain temples of ancient Japan, where mist rose from valleys like incense offered to invisible Buddhas, and where the sound of temple bells carried across ridges like messages between earth and sky, Zen masters spent their lives exploring the most fundamental question of human existence: what is the true nature of mind? Not the thinking mind that chatters constantly about plans and problems, but the deeper awareness that watches thoughts arise and fade like clouds in an endless sky. This investigation wasn't merely philosophical speculation. For Zen practitioners, understanding the mind's essential nature was the key to ending suffering and discovering unshakable peace. They discovered that what we usually call mind is actually two different phenomena: the surface mind that thinks and worries and judges, and the vast, open awareness that remains peaceful regardless of what thoughts might be appearing. During the late Edo period, when Japan was still closed to most foreign influence but Christian ideas were beginning to seep through the sealed borders, there lived a Zen master named Gassen, whose openness to truth wherever it appeared would challenge conventional notions about religious boundaries. Gassen taught at a mountain monastery where students came from across the country to learn about the Buddha's way. One day, a university student who had been exposed to Western learning approached Gassen with a leather-bound book. Christianity was officially banned in Japan at this time, and possession of Christian texts could result in imprisonment or death. Yet this young scholar had somehow obtained a copy of the Christian Bible and was curious about how it might compare to Buddhist teachings. "Master," the student said nervously, "have you ever read the Christian Bible?" "No," Gassen replied simply. "Read it to me." The student opened the book and began reading from the Gospel of Matthew, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke words that many would consider heretical. "And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself." Gassen listened with the same attention he brought to the most sacred Buddhist sutras. When the student finished reading this passage, the master's eyes lit up with recognition. "Whoever uttered those words," he said with genuine admiration, "I consider an enlightened man." Encouraged by this response, the student continued reading, "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened." Again, Gassen nodded with appreciation. "That is excellent," he observed. "Whoever said that is not far from Buddhahood." This remarkable exchange reveals something profound about the enlightened mind. Gassen wasn't concerned with religious labels or institutional boundaries. He recognized wisdom wherever it appeared, whether in Buddhist sutras or Christian gospels. The awakened awareness doesn't discriminate between sources of truth. It simply recognizes the fragrance of genuine understanding. What Gassen demonstrated is what Buddhists call beginner's mind, the ability to encounter each moment with fresh openness, free from the prejudices that usually cloud our perception. Most religious people would have rejected the Christian text immediately, just as most Christians might dismiss Buddhist teachings without investigation. But the truly wise mind sees beyond surface differences to the universal principles that connect all authentic spiritual teaching. This story also illustrates an essential aspect of Zen training, the cultivation of what we might call spiritual discrimination, the ability to recognize truth regardless of its packaging. Like a bee that can find nectar in any flower, the awakened mind can extract wisdom from any genuine source. The Buddha himself, 2,500 years ago in ancient India, taught about this same quality of open awareness through a parable that would become one of the most beloved stories in all of Buddhist literature. It speaks directly to our human tendency to become so focused on our problems that we miss the beauty and opportunity that exists in every moment. A man was traveling across a field, the Buddha taught, when he encountered a hungry tiger. Terrified, he began to run, but the tiger gave chase. Coming to the edge of a cliff, the man grabbed hold of a wild vine and swung himself over the precipice. Looking down, he saw another tiger waiting at the bottom of the cliff, ready to devour him if he fell. Only the vine stood between him and certain death. As he hung there in terror, the man noticed two mice, one white and one black, gnawing steadily at the vine that held him. Little by little, they were chewing through his only support. Above him, a tiger waited. Below him, another tiger waited, and the mice were slowly destroying his lifeline. Suddenly, the man noticed a wild strawberry growing on the cliff face, just within reach. Grasping the vine with one hand, he plucked the strawberry with the other and placed it in his mouth. How sweet it tasted! This simple story contains the entire essence of Buddhist wisdom about the nature of mind and the secret of true happiness. The man in the parable represents each of us, caught between the tiger of our past regrets and the tiger of our future fears. The white and black mice represent day and night, constantly gnawing away at the vine of our remaining time. We are all hanging over the precipice of uncertainty, never knowing when our support might give way. Most of us spend our lives focused entirely on the tigers and the mice, obsessing about dangers that threaten us, worrying about problems we cannot solve. But the Buddha's teaching points to a different possibility. Even in the midst of genuine danger and uncertainty, there is always a strawberry within reach. There is always some simple beauty, some immediate pleasure, some present moment gift available to those who have eyes to see it. The sweetness of the strawberry doesn't eliminate the reality of the tigers or stop the mice from gnawing, but it reveals that life offers us a choice in every moment. We can focus on what threatens us, or we can notice what nourishes us. The awakened mind learns to taste the strawberry fully while remaining aware of the larger situation. This capacity to find sweetness in the midst of difficulty isn't naive optimism or spiritual bypassing. It's a practical skill that comes from understanding the true nature of mind. Our awareness is vast enough to hold both danger and beauty, both fear and appreciation, both problem and gift. When we learn to rest in this spacious awareness, rather than becoming lost in our particular concerns, we discover an unshakable peace that no external circumstance can disturb. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, where the changing seasons painted temple gardens in endless cycles of birth and death, there lived a master calligrapher named Kosen, whose artistic skill was renowned throughout Japan. Kosen understood that true artistry comes not from the thinking mind that judges and compares, but from the natural mind that expresses itself spontaneously without self-consciousness. His story would reveal something essential about the difference between these two modes of awareness. 200 years before Kosen's time, the famous Obaku Temple in Kyoto had commissioned a master to create the large wooden letters that would hang over the main gate. The phrase chosen was the first principle, pointing to the fundamental truth that underlies all Buddhist teaching. These letters, carved from Kosen's original calligraphy, had become legendary among those who appreciated fine artistic work. When Kosen was asked to recreate this masterpiece, he accepted the commission with characteristic humility. His approach to calligraphy embodied the Zen principle of no mind, allowing the brush to move without interference from self-conscious thoughts about technique or outcome. Yet on this particular day, Kosen faced an unusual challenge. One of his students, who had been mixing ink and preparing materials for the session, had developed quite strong opinions about his master's work. This young man had appointed himself as critic and judge, commenting freely on every piece Kosen produced. Rather than observing silently and learning from the master's process, the student constantly evaluated and found fault. Kosen began his work, settling into the meditative state that allowed his deepest artistic understanding to flow through the brush. But as soon as he completed the first rendering of the first principle, his student shook his head disapprovingly. "That is not good," he declared, with the confidence of someone who knew nothing about the challenges of true creation. Patiently, Kosen prepared another sheet of paper and began again. This time he worked more slowly, paying extra attention to each stroke. But again, when he finished, the student pronounced his judgment. How was that one? Poor. Worse than before. For hours, this process continued. Kosen would create a piece with genuine skill and artistry, and his student would reject it with increasingly harsh criticism. Sheet after sheet accumulated until 84 versions of the first principle lay scattered around the room, each one dismissed by the self-appointed critic. Finally, the student stepped outside for a few moments to attend to some other matter. In his absence, Kosen felt a tremendous relief. Now is my chance, he thought, to escape his critical eye and work with a mind free from distraction. Without hesitation, he picked up his brush and wrote the first principle with complete spontaneity. No second guessing, no self-consciousness, no awareness of being judged, just the natural expression of decades of training flowing through ink onto paper. When the student returned and saw this latest version, his eyes widened with surprise. A masterpiece, he pronounced with the same authority he had used to condemn the previous attempts. This story reveals something profound about the nature of creative expression and the mind that judges versus the mind that creates. When Kosen worked under the critical gaze of his student, his natural artistic flow was constrained by self-consciousness. He was creating not from his deepest understanding, but from his conditioned responses to evaluation and approval. The moment his critic stepped away, Kosen's true nature emerged. Free from the burden of being watched and judged, his hand moved with the same spontaneous perfection that guides a bird in flight or a flower in blooming. This is what Zen calls original mind, the awareness that acts with perfect appropriateness when not filtered through the ego's concerns about performance and approval. We all carry a critical student in our heads, that voice that constantly evaluates our efforts and usually finds them wanting. This inner critic convinces us that we need to think harder, try harder, be more careful, be more perfect. But Kosen's experience shows us that our finest expressions come not from this effortful, self-conscious mind, but from the natural wisdom that emerges when we stop trying so hard to impress ourselves and others. The Buddha taught that this natural mind is our true nature, not something we need to create or achieve, but something we need to stop obscuring. Like the sun that shines continuously but can be hidden by clouds, our essential awareness is always present, but often covered by the fog of self-judgment and mental commentary. When the clouds part, even briefly, we discover that the light was there all along. What these three stories reveal about the nature of mind is both simple and revolutionary. Gessan's openness to truth regardless of its source, the Buddha's teaching about finding sweetness in difficulty, and Kosun's discovery of natural expression beyond criticism, all point to the same fundamental recognition. Our ordinary thinking mind is not our deepest identity. Beneath the layer of mental commentary and judgment lies a vast, open awareness that is naturally wise, naturally compassionate, and naturally at peace. This awareness doesn't need to be improved or educated or fixed. It simply needs to be recognized and trusted. When we learn to rest in this deeper mind, even for brief moments, we discover that we already possess everything we've been seeking. Not because our problems disappear, but because we find ourselves spacious enough to hold all our experiences with grace. Like the man who could taste the strawberry's sweetness while hanging between tigers, we can learn to find peace in the midst of uncertainty, wisdom in the midst of confusion, and love in the midst of difficulty. This is the gift of understanding our true nature, not as small separate selves struggling against life, but as the vast awareness in which all of life's experiences arise and pass away like waves in an endless ocean. In the mountains of northern Japan, where winter snows could isolate temples for months at a time, and monks developed ingenious ways to continue their spiritual education despite harsh conditions, there arose a tradition of teaching that relied not on elaborate explanations or scholarly discourse, but on direct, immediate action. These masters understood something profound about how true understanding actually occurs, not through the accumulation of concepts, but through sudden recognition that bypasses the thinking mind entirely. This approach, which Zen calls direct pointing, emerged from the recognition that our deepest wisdom cannot be captured in words or transmitted through lectures. Like trying to describe the taste of honey to someone who has never experienced sweetness, verbal explanations of enlightenment often create more confusion than clarity. The most skillful teachers learned to create situations where understanding could dawn naturally, like sunrise breaking over a mountain peak. In a remote temple nestled among pine forests where the sound of wind through branches served as constant meditation music, there lived two brother monks whose contrasting abilities would become the subject of one of Zen's most beloved teaching stories. The elder brother was renowned throughout the region for his scholarly achievements. He had memorized countless sutras, mastered complex philosophical debates, and could discourse eloquently on the subtlest points of Buddhist doctrine. The younger brother presented a stark contrast. Simple in manner and limited in intellectual capacity, he had learned only the most basic elements of Buddhist practice. His fellow monks sometimes whispered that he lacked the mental acuity necessary for advanced spiritual development. Most tragically, he had lost one eye in an accident, which in that era was considered both a physical disfigurement and a sign of bad karma. During the Kamakura period, when wandering monks regularly challenged temple communities to debates about Buddhist philosophy, maintaining intellectual credibility was considered essential for a monastery's reputation. These debates followed strict protocols. Any monk who could defeat the resident teachers in philosophical argument earned the right to stay and continue the discussion. Those who were defeated had to move on immediately, seeking another temple where they might find worthy opponents. One autumn afternoon, when golden leaves carpeted the temple grounds like scattered prayers, a traveling monk arrived, seeking such a debate. He was clearly learned and confident, carrying himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to intellectual victory. The elder brother, who would normally have welcomed such a challenge, found himself exhausted from intensive study sessions. "I'm too tired today for formal debate," the elder brother told his simple sibling. "You'll have to take my place. But remember, this must be conducted in silence. No words are permitted." The younger brother, despite his intellectual limitations, possessed something far more valuable than scholarly knowledge: complete trust in the moment and willingness to respond authentically to whatever arose. He agreed to the challenge without understanding what he was getting into. The two monks, the learned visitor and the simple temple resident, seated themselves in the meditation hall before the shrine. According to the rules of silent debate, they would communicate entirely through gestures, with the depth of their understanding revealed through symbolic actions, rather than verbal arguments. The traveling monk began by holding up one finger. In Buddhist iconography, this gesture traditionally represents the unity of all existence, the singular truth that underlies apparent diversity. It was a sophisticated opening move, requiring his opponent to demonstrate understanding of non-dualistic philosophy. Without hesitation, the younger brother held up two fingers. The visitor interpreted this as indicating Buddha and his teachings, the awakened one and the path he revealed. Impressed by this response, he held up three fingers, representing Buddha, his teachings, and the community of practitioners who follow the path. Suddenly, the simple monk shook his clenched fist directly in the visitor's face. The learned monk immediately stood up, bowed respectfully, and left the temple without another gesture. The elder brother, who had been waiting anxiously for the outcome, rushed to find his sibling. "How did the debate go? What happened?" "That fellow was incredibly rude," the younger brother replied indignantly. "The moment he saw me, he held up one finger, insulting me by pointing out that I have only one eye. Since he was a guest, I tried to be polite, so I held up two fingers to congratulate him on having both eyes. But then, the rude man held up three fingers, suggesting that between the two of us we only have 3 eyes total. That made me so angry I started to punch him, but he ran away before I could connect." Meanwhile, the traveling monk was explaining his departure to a fellow student who met him on the road. "That temple houses a remarkable teacher," he said with genuine admiration. "His understanding is profound beyond anything I've encountered." First, I held up one finger to represent Buddha, the enlightened one. He immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating Buddha and his teaching. When I added a 3rd finger for the Sangha, the community of practitioners, he showed me his clenched fist, demonstrating that all three come from one realization. His wisdom is so deep that I have no right to remain in his presence. This delightful story reveals something essential about the nature of authentic understanding. The learned monk's interpretation was sophisticated and philosophically correct, but it was still just interpretation, mental concepts, layered over immediate experience. The simple brother's responses came from pure spontaneity, unfiltered by religious knowledge or spiritual pretension. Yet somehow, his innocent authenticity communicated more profound wisdom than any scholarly discourse could have achieved. This illustrates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that responds to each moment without the burden of accumulated assumptions about what should happen. The Buddha himself taught that true understanding often appears in the most unexpected places and through the most unlikely teachers. Learn from everyone, he counseled his disciples. Even a child playing in the dust may point you toward enlightenment. In the bustling markets of ancient Japan, where merchants hawked their wares and housewives searched for the day's provisions, spiritual seekers rarely expected to encounter profound Buddhist teaching. Yet it was precisely in such ordinary settings that some of the most powerful moments of awakening occurred. The master Banzan discovered this truth during what seemed like a routine shopping expedition. Banzan had spent years in formal meditation practice, studying under accomplished teachers and mastering the traditional methods of Zen training. He understood Buddhist philosophy intellectually and could discuss the finest points of doctrine with great sophistication. Yet despite all his learning and practice, the direct experience of enlightenment remained elusive. One morning, walking through the crowded marketplace in search of vegetables for the temple, Banzan found himself behind a customer who was engaged in animated conversation with a butcher. In those days, Buddhist monks rarely frequented meat stalls, but the narrow market lanes meant that all shoppers passed by every vendor. "Give me the best piece of meat you have," the customer demanded, clearly someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. The butcher, a weathered man whose hands bore the stains of his trade, looked at her with the patient expression of someone who had heard this request countless times. "Everything in my shop is the best," he replied, matter-of-factly. "You cannot find here any piece of meat that is not the best." In that moment, Banzan felt something shift in his understanding, like a door suddenly swinging open in a room he thought he knew completely. The butcher's simple statement contained the entire essence of Buddhist teaching about the perfect nature of reality, exactly as it is. Every experience, every moment, every circumstance is already complete and perfect, not because it matches our preferences, but because it is precisely what this moment contains. For years, Banzan had been seeking the best spiritual experience, the highest state of consciousness, the perfect moment of enlightenment. Like the customer demanding the finest cut of meat, he had been discriminating between experiences, rejecting some as inferior and grasping after others as superior. But the butcher's wisdom revealed that such discrimination itself was the obstacle to awakening. In Zen understanding, every moment of ordinary life contains the complete Buddha nature. The sound of arguing in the marketplace is no less sacred than the silence of the meditation hall. The frustration of waiting in line carries the same potential for awakening as the bliss of deep samadhi. When we stop seeking special experiences and recognize the perfection of whatever is already happening, enlightenment reveals itself as our natural condition. This recognition didn't require Banzan to change anything about his life or his practice. He simply saw clearly, for the first time, that what he had been seeking was already present in every moment he had been rejecting as ordinary or unsatisfactory. The butcher, without any intention to teach Buddhism, had pointed directly to the heart of non-dualistic awareness. The beauty of this story lies in its ordinariness. No dramatic mystical experiences, no supernatural phenomena, no special techniques or secret teachings. Just a simple exchange between a merchant and customer that revealed the deepest truth about the nature of reality. This is how Zen teaching often works, not through grand gestures or elaborate ceremonies, but through sudden recognition that dawns in the midst of completely mundane circumstances. In the rural provinces of Japan, where traditional values remained strong even as the country modernized, there lived a Zen master named Mokusen Hiki, whose teaching methods were as practical as they were profound. Mokusen understood that true spiritual development must manifest in daily life, not just in formal meditation sessions. His approach to teaching often involved helping people recognize how their habitual patterns created unnecessary suffering. One of Mokusen's lay students came to him with a complaint that revealed deep frustration with his domestic situation. "Master," the man said, "my wife is incredibly stingy. She hoards every coin and refuses to share anything with those in need. Her tightness with money is causing problems in our marriage and preventing me from practicing generosity as Buddhism teaches. What should I do?" Rather than offering advice or explaining Buddhist principles about generosity, Mokusen decided to visit the man's wife directly. He appeared at their home one afternoon and requested a brief audience with the woman. When she appeared, curious about why a respected Zen master would visit her personally, Mokusen performed an action that seemed completely bizarre. Without saying a word, he held up his hand in a tight fist directly in front of her face. The woman stared at the clenched fist, bewildered by this strange greeting. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Suppose my fist were always like this," Mokusen said, maintaining the rigid gesture. "What would you call it?" The woman considered the question seriously. "Deformed," she replied honestly. Immediately, Mokusen opened his hand completely flat and held it palm up before her face. "And suppose it were always like this," he continued. "What then?" "Another kind of deformity," the wife answered, beginning to sense that this demonstration had some deeper purpose. Mokusen smiled and nodded approvingly. "If you understand that much," he concluded, "you are a very wise woman." With that, he bowed politely and left their home. The teaching was so clear and immediate that it required no further explanation. The woman instantly understood that both extreme grasping and extreme giving represent imbalance. A healthy hand opens and closes naturally as circumstances require, sometimes holding, sometimes releasing, always responding appropriately to the moment's needs. From that day forward, the couple found a middle way in their approach to money and generosity. The wife learned to open her hand when giving was appropriate, while her husband learned to close his when preservation was wise. Neither extreme grasping nor compulsive giving, but natural responsiveness to each situation. Mokusan's teaching method reveals something profound about how wisdom actually transforms behavior. Rather than lecturing about Buddhist economics or the importance of generous giving, he created an experience that allowed insight to arise naturally. The woman's own intelligence recognized the truth once it was pointed out through direct demonstration. This story also illustrates the middle way that lies at the heart of all Buddhist teaching. The Buddha discovered that neither extreme indulgence nor extreme asceticism leads to liberation. True freedom comes from learning to respond flexibly to each situation, neither grasping desperately nor pushing away compulsively. What all these stories of teaching through action reveal is that the most profound wisdom cannot be transmitted through words alone. Like pointing at the moon, verbal teaching can indicate the direction, but each person must see the actual moon for themselves. Skillful teachers create opportunities for direct recognition, rather than trying to fill students' minds with more concepts and beliefs. The one-eyed monk's spontaneous authenticity, the butcher's simple statement about perfection, and Mokusan's hand demonstration all bypassed the thinking mind and spoke directly to intuitive understanding. They worked because they pointed to immediate experience, rather than abstract philosophy. In each case, awakening happened not through accumulating new information, but through seeing clearly what was already present. This is the essence of Zen's direct pointing, cutting through conceptual elaboration to reveal the obvious truth that we usually overlook in our search for something more complex or special. The deepest teachings are often the simplest. Respond naturally to what arises, recognize the perfection of what is, and maintain the flexible balance that life requires. When we embody these simple truths, rather than just understanding them intellectually, our very presence becomes a teaching that needs no words. We become living demonstrations of the peace and wisdom that emerge when human beings align themselves with the natural flow of existence. In the ancient temples of Japan, where seasons marked their passage through the changing colors of maple leaves and the falling of cherry blossoms, Buddhist masters understood something that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid: the profound truth that nothing in this world remains the same forever. This teaching, which Buddhism calls impermanence, isn't meant to make us sad or fearful, but to free us from the exhausting struggle of trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary. The wise teachers of old discovered that when we truly accept the flowing, changing nature of existence, we stop wasting energy fighting against life's natural rhythms. Instead of grasping desperately at moments of happiness or pushing away experiences of difficulty, we learn to ride the waves of change with the grace of a skilled surfer who who works with the ocean's power rather than against it. During the Kamakura period, when Buddhism had become deeply woven into the fabric of Japanese culture, there lived a nun named Eshun, whose approach to her own death would demonstrate the ultimate freedom that comes from fully embracing impermanence. Eshun had devoted her entire adult life to Zen practice, shaving her head as a young woman and dedicating herself completely to understanding the Buddha's way. By the time she reached her 60s, her insight into the nature of reality had become profound and unshakable. Buddhist nuns in medieval Japan faced unique challenges. Society offered women few alternatives beyond marriage and motherhood, so choosing the monastic path required tremendous courage and determination. These women had to prove themselves constantly, demonstrating that their spiritual understanding was equal to that of their male counterparts. Eshun had not only met this challenge, but had become renowned for the depth of her realization. As her final years approached, Eshun began to contemplate how she might use her death as a teaching opportunity. In Buddhist understanding, the moment of death reveals the true depth of one's spiritual understanding. Those who have genuinely realized the impermanent nature of existence can face their final transition with complete equanimity, while those still attached to the illusion of permanence experience fear and resistance. One crisp autumn day, when Eshun sensed that her time was drawing near, she asked several monks to pile wood in the temple courtyard. The men complied, though they were puzzled by this unusual request. When they finished stacking the logs, Eshun walked calmly to the center of the pile and seated herself in perfect meditation posture. "Please light the fire around the edges," she instructed with the same calm tone she might use to request tea. The monks were horrified. "Master Eshun, what are you doing? This is madness." But Eshun had made her decision. She understood that death was approaching whether she welcomed it or not, and she chose to meet it on her own terms, rather than waiting passively for illness or old age to take her. More importantly, she wanted to demonstrate something profound about the relationship between fear and attachment. Reluctantly, the monks lit the fire, as she had requested. As flames began to rise around her, one of them called out in distress, "Master, is it hot in there?" Eshun's response became one of the most quoted lines in Zen literature. "Such a matter," she replied calmly, "would concern only a stupid person like yourself." With that, the flames rose higher, and Eshun passed away in perfect peace. Her final words weren't meant as an insult, but as a teaching about the nature of identification. When we identify completely with the physical body, sensations like heat and cold seem overwhelmingly important. But when we recognize our essential nature as the awareness that observes all experiences, even physical pain loses its power to disturb our fundamental peace. Eshun's dramatic demonstration revealed that freedom from the fear of death comes not from believing in an afterlife or hoping for rescue, but from understanding so completely the impermanent nature of all phenomena that we no longer cling to this particular arrangement of elements we call myself. This doesn't mean that enlightened beings become callous or indifferent to physical existence. Rather, they develop what Buddhists call sacred indifference, the ability to care deeply while holding everything lightly. They love life fully, while understanding that all forms of life are temporary expressions of something eternal and unchanging. In the mountain monasteries where winter brought months of isolation and contemplation, monks developed a profound appreciation for the cyclical nature of existence. They watch seasons change with the reliability of cosmic clockwork. Spring's tender green shoots emerging from snow, summer's lush abundance, autumn's brilliant colors, and winter's austere beauty. These natural rhythms taught them that what appears to be ending is actually just transforming into something new. The great master Soyen Shaku, who would later become the first Zen teacher to visit America, embodied this understanding throughout his long life of practice. From childhood, Soyen demonstrated an unusual relationship to time and discipline that reflected his deep appreciation for life's precious brevity. His daily routine became a teaching in itself about how to live when we truly understand that every moment is irreplaceable. Soyen established a personal rule that he followed faithfully every day of his adult life. In the morning before dressing, light incense and meditate. Retire at a regular hour. Partake of food at regular intervals. Eat with moderation and never to the point of satisfaction. Receive a guest with the same attitude you have when alone. When alone, maintain the same attitude you have in receiving guests. Watch what you say, and whatever you say, practice it. When an opportunity comes, do not let it pass by, yet always think twice before acting. Do not regret the past. Look to the future. Have the fearless attitude of a hero and the loving heart of a child. Upon retiring, sleep as if you had entered your last sleep. Upon awakening, leave your bed behind you instantly, as if you would cast away a pair of old shoes. This remarkable code of conduct reveals how someone who has truly absorbed the teaching of impermanence approaches daily life. Every action becomes deliberate and conscious when we remember that we have only a limited number of breaths, meals, conversations, and sunrises remaining. Yet this awareness doesn't create anxiety or desperate grasping. Instead, it brings a quality of precious attention to even the most ordinary activities. Notice how Soyen's rules encourage both engagement and non-attachment. When an opportunity comes, do not let it pass by, suggests full participation in life's offerings. Yet, always think twice before acting, reminds us to respond wisely rather than reactively. Do not regret the past and look to the future. Point toward the balanced awareness that learns from experience without being trapped by it. Most profoundly, Soyen's instruction to sleep as if you had entered your last sleep and leave your bed behind you instantly as if you would cast away a pair of old shoes captures the essence of how enlightened beings relate to sleep, both life and death. Each night they release the day completely, and each morning they embrace the new day without dragging yesterday's concerns along. They practice dying every evening and being reborn every dawn. The story of a remarkable Tendai priest provides another window into how deep understanding of impermanence transforms our relationship to what others consider tragedy. This priest lived during a time when family obligations and religious duties often conflicted, forcing individuals to make difficult choices between competing loyalties. His response to one such conflict would reveal wisdom that transcends conventional thinking about loss and attachment. When this priest's wife died after a long illness, the grieving widower requested that sutras be recited for her spiritual benefit. In Buddhist tradition, such ceremonies help guide the deceased through the intermediate states between death and rebirth. The merit generated by the chanting was believed to ease the transition and potentially improve the conditions of the next incarnation. After the recitation was complete, the priest asked the monk who had performed the ceremony, "Do you think my wife will gain merit from these sutras?" "Not only your wife," the monk replied with traditional generosity, "but all sentient beings will benefit from this recitation." This answer, while doctrinally correct, troubled the grieving husband. "If all sentient beings will benefit," he said, "then my wife may be very weak, and others will take advantage of her, getting the merit that should rightfully be hers. Please recite the sutras again, but this time just for her alone." The monk patiently explained that the Buddhist ideal involves offering blessings and merit to all living beings without discrimination. "It is our desire as Buddhists to wish well-being for every creature," he said gently. "That is certainly a fine teaching," the priest agreed. "But please make one exception. I have a neighbor who is rough and mean to me. Just exclude him from all those sentient beings." This story appears humorous on the surface, but it reveals something profound about how grief and attachment can distort even our spiritual understanding. The priest intellectually accepted Buddhist teachings about universal compassion, but when faced with personal loss, his heart contracted into the very possessiveness and discrimination that Buddhism seeks to dissolve. He wanted exclusive spiritual benefits for his deceased wife, while excluding someone who had caused him difficulty. Yet this very human response also demonstrates something beautiful about the healing power of time and practice. Grief is a natural response to impermanence, when we haven't yet learned to love without grasping. The priest's possessive concern for his wife's merit reflected the depth of his love, even as it revealed the limitations of his understanding. True wisdom about impermanence doesn't eliminate love or make us indifferent to loss. Instead, it teaches us to love so completely and unconditionally that we can wish the very best for those we care about, without needing to control the outcome. When we understand that everything and everyone we love is already in a constant state of change, we learn to appreciate each moment of connection as a precious gift rather than a permanent possession. The deepest teaching about impermanence isn't that everything ends, but that everything is always beginning. Each breath is the first breath of the rest of our life. Each heartbeat opens into a moment that has never existed before and will never exist again. Each encounter with another person offers the possibility of seeing them with fresh eyes, free from the accumulated history of our previous interactions. When we truly understand this, life becomes simultaneously more poignant and more peaceful. More poignant because we recognize the irreplaceable preciousness of each passing moment. More peaceful because we stop fighting against the natural flow of change and learn to find our stability in the awareness that witnesses all transformations. The Buddha compared this understanding to a tree that remains rooted and stable, even as its leaves change with the seasons. Our essential nature, the awareness that observes all experiences, is like the tree's roots and trunk. Our thoughts, emotions, circumstances, and even our physical body are like the leaves that naturally appear, transform, and fall away. When we identify with the roots rather than the leaves, we discover an unshakable peace that isn't threatened by any particular change. We can love deeply without fear of loss because we recognize that what we truly love, the consciousness that animates all beings, is itself beyond birth and death. We can engage fully with life's temporary dramas while resting in the eternal awareness that watches all stories unfold. This is the ultimate wisdom of impermanence, not that everything passes away, but that the very passing away reveals something that never changes. In learning to dance gracefully with life's constant transformations, we discover the eternal partner who has been leading us all along. This recognition brings a peace so deep that even death becomes just another step in an endless dance of love and awareness. Deep in the sacred groves of ancient India, where the Buddha once walked among flowering trees and shared his insights with disciples who had abandoned everything to seek truth, there unfolded one of the most mysterious and beautiful stories in all of Buddhist literature. It speaks to something beyond ordinary understanding, a recognition so profound that even the gods themselves stopped to witness its expression. The disciple Subhuti had spent countless years studying under the Buddha, absorbing teachings about the nature of reality that challenged everything most people believe about existence. Unlike many students who sought dramatic experiences or supernatural powers, Subhuti was drawn to the most subtle and elusive of all Buddhist insights, the understanding of emptiness. Not emptiness as mere nothingness, but the recognition that all phenomena arise through interdependence without any fixed, separate essence. This teaching of emptiness, which Buddhism calls sunyata, represents one of the most sophisticated philosophical developments in human history. It suggests that what we normally take to be solid, independent reality is actually a fluid dance of relationships and conditions. Nothing exists as a separate, permanent entity, not objects, not thoughts, not even the self we imagine ourselves to be. Everything arises in dependence upon everything else, like waves emerging from and returning to an infinite ocean. Yet, for most students, this teaching remained merely intellectual, a concept to be grasped by the thinking mind, rather than a living reality to be directly experienced. Subhuti, however, had moved beyond conceptual understanding into what Buddhists call realization, the direct recognition of emptiness not as an idea, but as the very fabric of experience itself. He had discovered that this apparent emptiness is simultaneously fullness, that the absence of fixed identity allows for the presence of infinite possibility. One afternoon, Subhuti was sitting beneath a flowering tree in a state of profound meditation. His awareness had become so transparent, so free from the usual sense of separation between observer and observed, that he had essentially disappeared into the very emptiness he had spent years contemplating. In this state of what Zen calls no mind, there was no subhuti having an experience. There was simply pure experiencing itself. Suddenly, flower petals began to fall around him like gentle rain. They drifted down from the branches above, creating a soft carpet of color and fragrance that seemed to celebrate his profound realization. But these were no ordinary flowers falling in the natural course of seasonal change. Invisible voices whispered through the air around him, "We are praising you for your discourse on emptiness." Subhuti's eyes opened, though his state of unified awareness remained undisturbed. He looked around at the falling petals with gentle confusion. "But I have not spoken of emptiness," he said aloud. The divine voices responded immediately, "You have not spoken of emptiness, and we have not heard emptiness. This is true emptiness." With these words, the shower of blossoms intensified, as if the entire universe were celebrating this moment of perfect understanding. This extraordinary encounter reveals something essential about the nature of authentic realization. True understanding of emptiness cannot be captured in words or concepts, because it points to the reality that underlies all words and concepts. When Subhuti embodied this understanding so completely that even his meditation became a wordless teaching, the gods recognized the presence of wisdom that transcends ordinary discourse. The divine being's response, "You have not spoken of emptiness, and we have not heard emptiness," indicates the paradoxical nature of ultimate truth. Real emptiness isn't something that can be possessed or transmitted like information. It's the very space in which all experiences arise and pass away, including the experience of understanding, emptiness itself. What made this moment so remarkable wasn't that Subhuti achieved some extraordinary state, but that he demonstrated the complete ordinariness of enlightenment. He wasn't performing miracles or displaying supernatural powers. He was simply sitting under a tree, so naturally aligned with the fundamental nature of reality that his very presence became a teaching more eloquent than any lecture. The flower shower represents how reality itself responds when a human being fully embodies their deepest understanding. It's not that the gods were rewarding Subhuti for his achievement, but that his realization created the conditions for beauty and celebration to manifest spontaneously. When we stop forcing our agenda upon life and allow ourselves to become transparent to what is already present, magic happens not as something extraordinary, but as the natural expression of our true nature. In the mountain monasteries of medieval Japan, where dedication to spiritual practice required years of unwavering commitment, there lived a nun whose journey toward understanding would test every assumption about the relationship between effort and enlightenment. Her name was Gisho, and her story reveals something profound about the difference between accumulating spiritual experiences and actually embodying wisdom. Like many sincere seekers, she would discover that true understanding often arrives not as the result of our efforts, but as the recognition of what has always been present. Gisho had become a nun at the age of 10, entering a world where female practitioners had to prove themselves constantly in order to be taken seriously. Buddhist nunneries in Japan faced additional challenges, receiving less support than male monasteries, and often being regarded as secondary institutions. Yet Gisho possessed the kind of fierce determination that thrives under difficult conditions. For 16 years, she traveled throughout Japan, seeking instruction from the most accomplished Zen masters of her era. This was no casual spiritual shopping. It represented a complete dedication of her life to understanding the deepest teachings Buddhism had to offer. She spent 3 years with the master Unzan, absorbing his particular approach to meditation and koan study. Then 6 years with Kokei, wrestling with the subtle philosophical questions that can trap even advanced practitioners in conceptual webs. Despite her obvious sincerity and intellectual capability, something essential remained elusive. Gisho had accumulated vast knowledge about Buddhist doctrine and had developed considerable skill in meditation techniques. She could discuss the finest points of Zen philosophy with scholarly precision and could sit in meditation for hours without distraction. Yet the direct realization that transforms knowledge into wisdom, the sudden recognition that illuminates all previous learning, continued to escape her. Finally, she came to study with the master Inzan, whose reputation for uncompromising teaching methods was legendary throughout the region. Unlike her previous teachers, who had treated her with the careful respect often accorded to dedicated female practitioners, Inzan showed her no special consideration whatsoever. He scolded her with the same ferocity he directed toward his male students. He challenged her understanding without mercy. When her responses revealed attachment to concepts or spiritual pride, he would cuff her to awaken her inner nature, using whatever shock was necessary to break through her accumulated layers of spiritual sophistication. For 13 years, Gisho endured this demanding training. Morning and evening, she grappled with koans that seemed designed to exhaust every strategy her clever mind could devise. She was wrapped in these impossible riddles like someone caught in an intricate puzzle with no logical solution. Each time she thought she had found the answer, Inzan would demonstrate that she was still thinking about enlightenment rather than embodying it. Then, something shifted. After 29 years of seeking, after studying with the finest teachers, and mastering the most sophisticated techniques, Gisho suddenly found what she had been looking for. But found isn't quite the right word, because what she discovered was that she had never actually lost anything. The understanding she sought had been present all along, hidden not by her ignorance, but by her very efforts to achieve it. When authentic realization finally dawned, Inzan composed a poem in her honor that captured both the magnitude of her accomplishment and the pathless path she had traveled. This nun studied 13 years under my guidance. In the evening, she considered the deepest koans. In the morning, she was wrapped in other koans. The Chinese nun Tetsumo surpassed all before her, and since Mujaku, none has been so genuine as this Gisho. Yet there are many more gates for her to pass through. She should receive still more blows from my iron fist. This poem reveals something remarkable about the nature of enlightenment in Zen understanding. Even after achieving profound realization, Gisho's journey was far from complete. True awakening isn't a final destination, but an ongoing process of deepening and refining our understanding. The many more gates that Inzan mentioned refer to the endless opportunities for expressing wisdom in daily life, for manifesting our realization in service to others. Most significantly, Inzan's comment about "still more blows from my iron fist" suggests that authentic spiritual development never reaches a point where challenge and growth cease. The awakened life isn't a comfortable retirement from the difficulties of existence, but a willingness to meet each new situation with fresh responsiveness. Every moment offers another opportunity to embody our understanding more completely. After her enlightenment, Gisho established her own temple in the province of Banchu, where she taught 200 other nuns until her death. Her teaching style reflected what she had learned from Inzan, that true understanding emerges not from gentle encouragement, but from the willingness to have all our spiritual pretensions thoroughly demolished. She offered her students the same fierce compassion that had awakened her own deepest nature. The ancient master Joshu, who began studying Zen at the age of 60 and continued until he was 80, then taught until he was 120, encountered a student whose question would become one of the most famous exchanges in Zen literature. This brief dialogue reveals something essential about the relationship between having something and having nothing in the realm of spiritual understanding. It points to a paradox that lies at the very heart of authentic realization. "If I haven't anything in my mind," the student asked Joshu, "what shall I do?" Joshu's response was immediate and practical. "Throw it out." The student was genuinely puzzled. "But if I haven't anything, how can I throw it out?" "Well then," Joshu replied with characteristic directness, "carry it out." This exchange appears almost comical in its simplicity, yet it cuts directly to the core of what most spiritual seekers struggle with for years. The student's question reveals a common misconception about enlightenment, the idea that awakening means achieving a state of mental emptiness or blankness. Many people imagine that spiritual development involves getting rid of thoughts and emotions until some pure, empty consciousness remains. But Joshu's response reveals that this nothing the student thinks he has is actually a very substantial something. The concept of emptiness, the idea of having no mind, the goal of achieving some special state, all of these are mental constructions that need to be recognized and released. Even the notion of not having anything is still having something, namely, the notion itself. When the student protested that he couldn't throw out nothing, Joshu offered an even more practical solution: carry it out. This suggests that sometimes our spiritual concepts are so deeply embedded that we can't simply discard them through an act of will. Instead, we need to carry them with us until we naturally outgrow them, like a child who eventually stops playing with toys, not because the toys are taken away, but because other interests naturally arise. The deeper teaching in this exchange is that true understanding doesn't involve achieving any particular state of mind. Rather, it involves recognizing the awareness that is present, regardless of what states might be appearing. Whether our mind is full of thoughts or seemingly empty, busy with activities, or absorbed in meditation, the same awareness witnesses all experiences. This awareness doesn't need to be created or achieved. It simply needs to be recognized as what we already are. What these three stories of true understanding reveal is that authentic realization is simultaneously the most natural thing in the world and the most easily overlooked. Subhuti's wordless teaching, Jisho's recognition after decades of seeking, and Joshu's practical guidance all point to the same fundamental truth. What we seek is already present. The flower shower falls continuously. The enlightenment we pursue has been pursuing us. The emptiness we try to achieve is the very space in which all our efforts arise. True understanding, these masters discovered, doesn't come from accumulating more experiences or mastering more techniques. It comes from the profound relaxation that occurs when we stop trying to become someone else and recognize the perfection of what we already are. This doesn't mean we stop growing or learning or practicing. It means we do all these things from a foundation of completeness rather than from a sense of lack. The Buddha himself taught that enlightenment is not a matter of gaining something new, but of removing the obstacles that obscure what has always been present. Like polishing a mirror that has become dusty, spiritual practice doesn't create clarity, it reveals the clarity that was always there. When the mirror of awareness becomes completely transparent, it reflects everything perfectly while remaining utterly untouched by what it reflects. This is the ultimate understanding, not that we become enlightened beings, but that we recognize our essential nature as the awareness in which all experiences of enlightenment and confusion arise and pass away. In this recognition, seeking ends not in achievement, but in the joyful discovery that we never needed to seek anything at all. The flower shower has been falling all along. We simply needed to stop looking for something more dramatic and notice the beauty that surrounds us in every moment. In the quiet villages of feudal Japan, where life followed predictable rhythms of planting and harvest, birth and death, there occasionally appeared individuals whose way of thinking was so far beyond ordinary conventions that their actions seemed to come from another realm entirely. These masters had learned to respond not from the conditioned patterns that govern most human behavior, but from a deeper intelligence that transcends the limitations of conventional logic. This extraordinary freedom of mind didn't develop overnight. It emerged from years of questioning every assumption, challenging every belief, and gradually dissolving the mental structures that most people mistake for reality itself. What remained after this process of deconstruction wasn't emptiness or confusion, but a clarity so profound that appropriate action could arise spontaneously in any situation. During the Edo period, when Japan's rigid social hierarchy seemed as permanent as the mountains themselves, there lived a man whose encounter with the mysterious workings of mind would reveal something startling about the nature of guilt, memory, and the ghosts we create from our own unresolved emotions. His story demonstrates how even our most convincing psychological experiences can be products of our own thinking rather than external realities. This man had been deeply in love with his wife, and she with him. Their relationship represented the kind of devotion that poets celebrate and ordinary couples aspire to achieve. So when his beloved wife fell seriously ill, the approaching loss felt like the end of his world. On her deathbed, the dying woman extracted a promise that would haunt him for months to come. "I love you so much," she whispered weakly, "that I cannot bear the thought of leaving you. Promise me you will not go to any other woman after I die. If you do, I will return as a ghost and cause you endless trouble." The grieving husband, desperate to bring her any comfort in her final moments, readily agreed to this request. He could not imagine wanting anyone else anyway. His wife passed away peacefully, and for the first 3 months, the widower honored her wish without difficulty. But human hearts are not designed for permanent isolation. Eventually, the man met another woman whose kindness and beauty gradually awakened feelings he thought had died with his wife. Despite his guilt about violating his promise, he found himself falling in love again. When he finally proposed marriage, his new beloved accepted joyfully. The very night they became engaged, the impossible happened. The dead wife appeared to him as a ghost, her face twisted with betrayal and rage. "You have broken your promise to me," she accused. "I warned you what would happen." From that night forward, the ghost appeared regularly, demonstrating an uncanny knowledge of everything the man did with his new fiancée. If he gave his beloved a gift, the ghost could describe it in perfect detail. If they had private conversations, the ghost could repeat every word. The supernatural surveillance was so complete and accurate that the man began to doubt his own sanity. Sleep became impossible. Every night brought new accusations and demonstrations of the ghost's omniscience. The man's health began to deteriorate under the strain of constant guilt and supernatural harassment. Finally, a friend suggested he consult a Zen master who lived nearby and was known for his insight into unusual psychological problems. When the desperate man explained his situation, the master listened with the patient attention of someone who had encountered similar cases before. "Your former wife has become a very wise ghost indeed," he observed thoughtfully. "She knows everything you do and say. You should actually admire such a remarkable spirit. Most ghosts are quite limited in their awareness." This response puzzled the man. He had expected sympathy for his torment, not praise for his supernatural tormentor. "Since she knows so much," the master continued, "you should test her knowledge more thoroughly. The next time she appears, tell her that if she can answer one simple question, you will break your engagement and remain single for the rest of your life. This should satisfy her completely." The man leaned forward eagerly. "What question should I ask her?" The master reached into a bowl of soybeans and grabbed a large handful. "Take beans like these," he instructed, "and ask her to tell you exactly how many you hold in your hand. If she truly knows everything, this should be simple for her. But if she cannot tell you the precise number, you will know she is only a creation of your own mind." That night, when the ghost appeared with her usual accusations and demonstrations of omniscience, the man felt ready for her. He flattered her supernatural abilities and acknowledged her remarkable knowledge. "Indeed," he said, "you know everything. I realize now that I cannot hide anything from you." "That is correct," the ghost replied with satisfaction. I even know that you visited that Zen master today seeking advice about how to deal with me." "Since you know so much," the man said, producing a handful of soybeans from behind his back, "tell me exactly how many beans I hold in this hand." The ghost stared at the beans in stunned silence. For the first time since she had begun appearing, she seemed confused and uncertain. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. After several long moments, she simply vanished. The ghost never appeared again. The man married his beloved and lived happily, finally understanding that his supernatural tormentor had been nothing more than his own guilt and imagination given form. This remarkable story reveals something profound about the nature of psychological phenomena that seem completely real and external, but are actually productions of our own mind. The ghost knew everything about the man's relationship because she was created by his own consciousness. She could repeat conversations because his memory had recorded them. She could describe gifts because his eyes had seen them. But when asked to perceive something beyond the scope of his own knowledge, the exact number of beans hidden from his view, the illusion collapsed immediately. The Zen master's test cut through the supernatural drama to reveal the natural explanation. What seemed like communication with the dead was actually a dialogue between different aspects of the man's own psyche. During the same period when this psychological drama was unfolding, another story was developing that would demonstrate an entirely different kind of thinking that transcends ordinary social conventions. In Tokyo, there lived a man named Yamaoka Teshu, whose relationship to material possessions would challenge everything most people believe about appropriate behavior toward authority and wealth. His story reveals how enlightened consciousness responds to gifts and expectations in ways that seem shocking to conventional thinking, but arise from a deeper understanding of genuine value. Yamaoka Teshu served as tutor to the Emperor of Japan, one of the highest positions any scholar could achieve in Meiji-era society. He was also a master swordsman whose skill was legendary throughout the country, and a profound student of Zen whose understanding had been recognized by accomplished teachers. Yet despite these prestigious achievements, Yamaoka lived in voluntary simplicity that bordered on poverty. His home was continuously filled with vagabonds, wandering monks, and anyone else who needed shelter. Yamaoka's generous hospitality meant that whatever money came his way was immediately shared with those who had less. As a result, he owned almost nothing beyond the single set of clothes he wore daily. The emperor, observing how worn and patched his tutor's garments had become, felt concerned about the dignity of his court. It seemed inappropriate for someone in such an elevated position to appear so shabby. With characteristic imperial generosity, he gave Yamaoka a substantial sum of money, specifically to purchase new clothing. Weeks passed, and Yamaoka continued appearing at court in the same threadbare outfit. Finally, the emperor's curiosity overcame his politeness. "What became of the money I gave you for new clothes?" he asked directly. Yamaoka's response revealed a way of thinking that placed human welfare above social propriety. "I provided clothes for the children of your majesty," he explained simply. This answer initially confused the emperor, who had no knowledge of having children in need of clothing. Then he understood. Yamaoka was referring to all children as belonging to the emperor, since a true ruler's care extends to every person in his domain. The tutor had used the imperial gift to clothe poor children, who needed warm garments more urgently than he needed to maintain his court appearance. Rather than being offended by this apparent disregard for his specific instructions, the emperor recognized the profound wisdom in Yamaoka's action. His tutor had demonstrated the kind of thinking that sees beyond surface proprieties to fundamental human needs. He had transformed a gift intended to enhance one person's dignity into an expression of compassion that enhanced many people's welfare. Perhaps the most dramatic example of thinking that transcends ordinary concepts occurred in the private quarters of the Zen master Munan, whose understanding of spiritual transmission would challenge every conventional notion about religious authority and lineage. His student Shoju had completed years of intensive training and had demonstrated the depth of realization that qualified him to carry on his teacher's work. The moment of formal recognition would reveal something startling about the difference between authentic wisdom and institutional symbols. After Shoju had finished his Zen studies under Munan's guidance, the old master called him into his private room for a final conversation. "I am getting old," Munan said seriously, "and as far as I know, you are the only one capable of carrying on this teaching after I'm gone. Here is a book that has been passed down from master to master for 7 generations. I have also added my own insights, according to my understanding. This book is very valuable, and I'm giving it to you as the symbol of your succession to my position." The book represented everything most spiritual students dream of receiving: official recognition, direct transmission from teacher to student, membership in an ancient lineage of awakened masters. For generations, this text had been the concrete symbol that proved authentic spiritual authority. Possession of the book meant acceptance into the most exclusive spiritual fraternity in Japan. Shoju's response would have horrified conventional religious authorities. "If the book is such an important thing, you had better keep it," he said calmly. "I received your teaching without needing any written record, and I am satisfied with it as it is." Munan persisted, explaining the historical significance of the lineage book and its role in establishing spiritual legitimacy. "I understand that," Shoju replied, "but even so, this work has been carried from master to master for 7 generations. You may keep it as a symbol if you wish." As they talked, they happened to be sitting near a brazier where coals glowed warmly. The instant the book touched Shoju's hands, he thrust it directly into the flaming coals without a moment's hesitation. Munan, who had never been angry in decades of teaching, shouted in shock, "What are you doing?" Shoju shouted back with equal intensity, "What are you saying?" In that moment of mutual shouting, both master and student recognized something that transcends all books, lineages, and spiritual credentials. Shoju had demonstrated that true understanding cannot be contained in any external symbol, no matter how ancient or revered. His willingness to burn the lineage book proved that he had received something far more valuable than any written teaching. What these 3 stories reveal about thinking beyond ordinary conventions is both liberating and challenging. The man who dissolved his ghost, Yamaoka who redefined imperial gifts, and Shoju who burned sacred books, all demonstrate consciousness that operates from principles deeper than social expectations or spiritual traditions. They responded to each situation with complete authenticity, regardless of how shocking their actions might appear to conventional thinking. This kind of radical freedom doesn't emerge from rebelliousness or disrespect for tradition. Rather, it comes from such complete understanding of underlying principles that surface forms become fluid and negotiable. When we truly comprehend what matters most, we can respond to each moment with the freshness of someone encountering life for the first time. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is essentially a matter of seeing clearly, not seeing something special or supernatural, but seeing ordinary reality without the distortions created by our conditioning and expectations. When the lens of perception becomes completely transparent, appropriate action arises naturally, even when that action challenges everything we thought we knew about how enlightened people should behave. In this clarity, every moment becomes an opportunity to express the boundless creativity that emerges when consciousness operates beyond the limitations of ordinary thinking. In the mountain monasteries of ancient China, where morning mist rose from valleys like the breath of sleeping dragons and evening bells echoed across terraced hillsides, there lived masters who understood something profound about the relationship between spiritual realization and ordinary daily life. They had discovered that enlightenment isn't a special state reserved for meditation halls and formal ceremonies, but a way of being that expresses itself most authentically through the simplest activities: sweeping floors, preparing meals, tending gardens, and caring for others. This understanding challenged everything most people believed about spiritual development. Many seekers imagined that awakening meant transcending mundane concerns, rising above the need for physical work, or spending one's time in perpetual contemplation. But the truly wise teachers discovered that genuine realization actually deepens our appreciation for ordinary tasks and reveals the sacred dimension hidden within every practical activity. The great master Baizhang, whose name means 100 cliffs, embodied this understanding so completely that his approach to daily life became legendary throughout China. Even in his 80s, when most people would have retired to a life of honored leisure, Baizhang continued working alongside his students with the enthusiasm of someone half his age. Every morning found him in the monastery gardens, trimming bushes, raking paths, and pruning trees, with the careful attention of an artist perfecting a masterpiece. His students watched this display of physical dedication with growing concern. Here was their revered teacher, a man whose spiritual insights had attracted followers from across the empire, performing manual labor that younger monks could easily handle. They worried about his health and felt embarrassed that their master was doing work they should be doing themselves. "Master," they said to him repeatedly, "you have given us so much wisdom over the years. Please rest now and let us take care of the physical work. You have earned the right to spend your remaining time in peaceful contemplation." But Baizhang only smiled and continued his daily routine of physical labor. To him, there was no distinction between meditation and gardening, between teaching and tree trimming. Every activity performed with complete attention became a form of spiritual practice. Finally, the students decided to take matters into their own hands. One morning, they hid all of Baizhang's gardening tools before he could begin his usual work. Now, they thought with satisfaction, our teacher will have no choice but to rest. When Baizhang discovered his missing tools, he neither scolded his students nor searched for the hidden implements. He simply sat quietly in his room and refused to come out for meals. The first day passed, then the second. By the third day, the students began to worry seriously about their master's health. "He may be angry because we hid his tools," they whispered among themselves. "Perhaps we should return them and let him work as he wishes." The moment they restored his gardening implements, Baizhang emerged from his room with his characteristic gentle smile. He worked in the garden that day with obvious pleasure, then joined his students for the evening meal as if nothing unusual had happened. That night, he gave them a teaching that would become one of the most quoted principles in all of Zen Buddhism: no work, no food. This simple statement contained profound wisdom about the nature of authentic spiritual life. Baizhang wasn't making a rule about monastery economics or establishing a policy about who deserved meals. He was pointing to something essential about the relationship between contribution and nourishment, between giving and receiving, between spiritual understanding and practical engagement with the world. In Zen understanding, work isn't separate from spiritual practice. It is spiritual practice. When we approach any task with complete presence and attention, whether it's washing dishes or writing poetry, we create the conditions for wisdom to manifest naturally. The awakened life isn't about achieving some permanent state of bliss, but about bringing consciousness to whatever activity presents itself in each moment. Baizhang's refusal to eat when he couldn't work revealed something beautiful about the dignity of contribution. Even in his advanced age, he wanted to earn his place in the community through useful service, rather than simply receiving care based on his reputation or past achievements. This wasn't pride or stubbornness, but a deep understanding that spiritual fulfillment comes from participating fully in the give and take of life. During the Muromachi period in Japan, when the country was transitioning from medieval to early modern culture, there lived a Zen master whose approach to teaching would demonstrate another aspect of how wisdom expresses itself in daily life. His name was Ikkyu, and he possessed a quality that many spiritual teachers lack: the ability to find profound meaning in the most ordinary accidents and mistakes. His story reveals how enlightened awareness can transform even frustrating moments into opportunities for awakening. Ikkyu was known throughout Japan for his unconventional teaching methods and his refusal to take himself too seriously. Unlike many masters who maintained formal dignity at all times, Ikkyu often appeared more like a mischievous child than a revered spiritual authority. Yet this playful exterior concealed depths of understanding that could cut through pretension and reveal truth with startling clarity. When Ikkyu was still a young student, he served his teacher with the devotion typical of traditional monastery life. This included caring for his master's personal possessions, among which was a precious teacup that had become legendary for both its beauty and its historical significance. The cup was an antique of extraordinary value, one of those rare objects that represents the pinnacle of artistic achievement. One afternoon, while cleaning his teacher's quarters, Ikkyu accidentally knocked the treasured cup from its shelf. It shattered on the stone floor with the finality that only broken ceramics can produce. The pieces lay scattered, like fragments of a broken dream, impossible to repair or replace. Most students would have been paralyzed with terror at such a disaster. The cup's monetary value was enormous, but its sentimental significance was even greater. To break such a treasure seemed like the kind of mistake that could end a student's relationship with his teacher permanently. But Ikkyu possessed something that transformed this potential catastrophe into a teaching opportunity, the ability to see deeply into the nature of impermanence and attachment. Rather than panicking or trying to hide the evidence, he carefully gathered the broken pieces and waited for his teacher to return. When he heard familiar footsteps approaching, he hid the fragments behind his back and assumed an expression of innocent curiosity. "Master," Ikkyu said as his teacher entered the room, "why do people have to die?" This question seemed to come from nowhere, and the teacher paused to consider how best to address such a profound inquiry. "This is natural," he explained gently. "Everything that exists must eventually pass away. All phenomena have a natural lifespan, and when that time is complete, death comes as naturally as autumn follows summer. So everything has to die at its proper time." Ikkyu confirmed, bringing the broken pieces from behind his back. "Master, it was time for your teacup to die." This response revealed something remarkable about how enlightened awareness relates to loss and disappointment. Instead of making excuses or expressing regret, Ikkyu had used the accident as an opportunity to demonstrate one of Buddhism's most fundamental teachings, the universality of impermanence. He had transformed a moment of potential shame into a lesson about accepting the natural flow of existence. The teacher, rather than being angry about his lost treasure, was delighted by his student's creative response. He recognized that Ikkyu had understood something more valuable than any ceramic object, the wisdom that comes from aligning ourselves with life's natural processes rather than fighting against them. From that day forward, he knew that his young student possessed the kind of understanding that could transform any situation into spiritual insight. Perhaps the most radical example of living Zen in daily life emerged from the story of a master named Tosui, whose commitment to authentic spiritual practice led him to abandon all conventional markers of religious achievement. His journey would demonstrate how genuine realization sometimes requires us to let go of everything we've worked to attain, including spiritual status and social respectability. His story challenges every assumption about what an enlightened life should look like. Tosui had achieved everything a Zen teacher could hope for: recognition from accomplished masters, his own temple, devoted students, and a reputation that attracted seekers from throughout Japan. Yet despite these external signs of success, he felt increasingly uncomfortable with the formal structure of institutional Buddhism. Something about the hierarchy, the ceremonies, and the social expectations seemed to interfere with the direct, immediate quality of authentic spiritual life. One day, Tosui made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He announced that he was abandoning the lecture business entirely and walked away from his temple, his students, and his prestigious position. "Disperse and go wherever you wish," he told his followers. "Find your own way to truth." For 3 years, no one could find any trace of the missing master. Some assumed he had died in obscurity. Others imagined he had retreated to some remote mountain cave for solitary practice. Then, one of his former disciples happened to be crossing a bridge in Kyoto when he recognized a familiar figure among a group of beggars sleeping beneath the span. There was Tosui, dressed in rags and living as homeless people lived, completely integrated into the community of society's outcasts. The discovery created a moral crisis for the former student. Here was his revered teacher living in conditions that seemed to contradict everything Buddhism taught about the dignity of awakened beings. "Master," the student implored, "if you can live as I do for even a couple of days, I might consider returning to formal teaching." The challenge seemed simple enough. The former disciple had been a dedicated practitioner. Surely he could handle a brief period of voluntary poverty as a spiritual exercise. He dressed as a beggar and spent a day with Tosui, experiencing firsthand the reality of life at society's margins. The following day brought a test that revealed the difference between intellectual understanding and embodied wisdom. One of the beggars in their group died during the night, a common occurrence among people whose health was compromised by malnutrition and exposure. Tosui and his former student carried the body to a mountainside and buried it quietly at midnight, then returned to their shelter under the bridge. While Tosui slept peacefully through the remainder of the night, the former disciple lay awake, tormented by thoughts about death, disease, and the precariousness of existence. The proximity to mortality and the reality of physical vulnerability had shattered his comfortable assumptions about spiritual practice. When morning came, Tosui offered him some leftover food that the dead beggar had saved. The former student couldn't bring himself to eat food associated with death and poverty. His stomach churned at the thought, and his mind recoiled from what seemed like a violation of basic hygiene and human dignity. "I told you that you couldn't do as I do," Tosui concluded gently. "Get out of here and don't bother me again." This harsh dismissal wasn't cruelty, but compassion. Tosui had demonstrated that genuine spiritual freedom requires the ability to find peace and meaning under any circumstances, not just in the comfortable environment of temples and monasteries. His willingness to live among beggars wasn't a rejection of Buddhist values, but an expression of the deepest Buddhist teaching, that awakened consciousness recognizes no fundamental distinction between sacred and profane, high and low, success and failure. What these 3 stories reveal about living Zen is both inspiring and challenging. Baizhang's insistence on useful work, Ikkyu's creative response to accidents, and Tosui's radical embrace of poverty all demonstrate consciousness that has moved beyond the dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary life. They had discovered that enlightenment isn't a destination we reach, but a way of traveling through whatever circumstances life presents. Living Zen means bringing the same quality of attention to washing dishes that we bring to formal meditation. It means responding to broken teacups with the same wisdom we apply to broken relationships. It means finding the sacred in situations that society considers degrading or meaningless. The Buddha taught that awakening is not about achieving some special state, but about recognizing the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. When we see clearly, every moment reveals itself as complete and perfect, exactly as it is. This doesn't mean we stop working to improve conditions or help others. Rather, we work from a foundation of acceptance rather than resistance. In this understanding, there is no gap between our spiritual ideals and our daily reality. Every interaction becomes a chance to express compassion. Every task becomes an opportunity to practice presence. Every challenge becomes a teacher, pointing us toward greater wisdom. This is the ultimate teaching of Zen, not that we should escape from ordinary life, but that we should discover the infinite depth and meaning that ordinary life contains when approached with complete attention and an open heart. When we embody this understanding, we become living examples of the peace and wisdom that emerge naturally when human consciousness aligns itself with the fundamental principles that govern existence. Our very presence begins to teach what no words can convey, that it's possible to be fully human and fully awake at the same time. As our journey through these ancient stories draws toward its close, we come to perhaps the most profound teaching of all, the recognition that everything we have explored, every moment of confusion and clarity, every experience of separation and connection, every instance of seeking and finding, has been occurring within a unified field of awareness that was never actually divided. These final stories point toward the ultimate understanding that transcends even the distinction between teacher and student, wisdom and ignorance, enlightenment and ordinary life. The Buddha himself, in his final moments on earth, offered a teaching that would encapsulate everything he had discovered during his 45 years of sharing the path to awakening. As he lay beneath the sala trees in the grove at Kushinaga, surrounded by disciples whose hearts were breaking at the thought of losing their beloved teacher, the Buddha spoke words that reveal the deepest secret of existence itself. These weren't complex philosophical explanations or elaborate meditation instructions, but simple observations that cut directly to the heart of what it means to be truly awake. I consider the positions of kings and rulers, the Buddha said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime spent observing the human condition, as that of dust motes dancing in sunlight. I observe treasures of gold and gems as so many bricks and pebbles scattered on a path. I look upon the finest silken robes as tattered rags that will soon return to dust. His disciples listened in profound silence, understanding that they were receiving the distilled essence of enlightened perception. The Buddha was revealing how awakened awareness sees through the conventional values that drive most human behavior. What society considers precious appears temporary and insubstantial when viewed from the perspective of ultimate reality. I see the myriad worlds of the universe as small seeds of fruit, he continued, his eyes reflecting a peace that seemed to encompass all of existence. The greatest lake in India appears to me as a drop of oil on my foot. I perceive the teachings of the world to be the illusions of magicians, creating apparent wonders that have no lasting substance. These comparisons weren't meant to diminish the relative importance of worldly concerns, but to reveal the vast perspective that becomes available when consciousness expands beyond its usual limitations. From the Buddha's enlightened viewpoint, even the most impressive human achievements were like waves on an infinite ocean, beautiful in their temporary manifestation, but never separate from the boundless source from which they arose. I discern the highest conception of emancipation as a golden brocade seen in a dream, the Buddha observed, pointing to something that would shock many spiritual seekers. Even the goal of liberation itself, when grasped as something to be attained, becomes another form of subtle bondage. True freedom lies beyond both suffering and the desire to escape suffering. I view the holy path of the illuminated ones as flowers appearing in one's eyes when pressure is applied to them, he continued, revealing that even spiritual practices and stages of development are temporary phenomena arising within awareness. The path is real and necessary, but it ultimately dissolves into the pathless recognition of what we have always been. I see meditation as a pillar of a mountain, the Buddha said, acknowledging the stability and importance of contemplative practice while pointing beyond formal techniques to the natural state of undisturbed awareness. Nirvana appears to me as a nightmare of daytime, for even the concept of perfect peace becomes a disturbance when we grasp at it. Finally, in words that would echo through centuries of Buddhist teaching, the Buddha concluded, I look upon the judgment of right and wrong as the serpentine dance of a dragon, and the rise and fall of beliefs as but traces left by the four seasons. With this ultimate teaching, the Buddha revealed that enlightened awareness transcends even moral categories and philosophical positions. Not because ethics become irrelevant, but because wisdom responds to each situation with such natural appropriateness that rigid rules and fixed beliefs become unnecessary. Like the changing seasons, all human concepts arise, serve their purpose, and naturally pass away within the unchanging space of pure awareness. These final words point toward a unity so complete that it includes and transcends all apparent opposites. In this ultimate perspective, seeker and sought, teacher and student, ignorance and wisdom are revealed as temporary modifications of the same underlying consciousness. The Buddha's teaching was complete, not because he had said everything there was to say, but because he had pointed directly to the source from which all words and silence arise. During the Kamakura period in Japan, when Zen Buddhism was beginning to take root in Japanese soil, there lived a master named Kakua, whose understanding of this same unity would express itself in a way that shocked even the emperor. Kakua had traveled to China to receive authentic transmission from the lineage masters there, becoming the first Japanese monk to study Zen in its homeland. When he returned to Japan after years of intensive practice, his approach to teaching would demonstrate something profound about the relationship between words and ultimate truth. Word of Kakua's accomplishment reached the imperial court, where the emperor himself had developed an interest in this new form of Buddhism. Unlike the elaborate philosophical schools that had dominated Japanese Buddhism for centuries, Zen promised direct insight into the nature of mind itself. The emperor requested that Kakua come to the palace to explain these teachings, for the benefit of the court. Kakua accepted the imperial invitation and appeared before the emperor as requested. The entire court assembled to hear what wisdom this master had brought back from China. They expected learned discourse, perhaps demonstrations of meditation techniques, or at least explanations of the profound insights he had gained during his years of study. Instead, Kakua stood before the emperor in complete silence. Minutes passed without a word. The courtiers shifted uncomfortably, wondering if the master was waiting for some formal protocol or struggling to find appropriate words for such an august audience. Then, from the folds of his simple robe, Kakua produced a bamboo flute. He raised it to his lips and played a single, clear note that resonated through the silent hall. The sound hung in the air for a moment, pure and complete, containing everything that needed to be said. Without another sound, Kakua bowed politely to the emperor and walked away. He disappeared from the capital that very day and was never seen at court again. This extraordinary teaching demonstrated something that volumes of explanation could never convey. The single note contained the entire essence of Zen, direct pointing to the nature of mind, beyond the complications of philosophical discussion. In that moment of pure sound arising from silence and returning to silence, Kakua had revealed the complete unity that underlies all apparent diversity. The emperor, rather than feeling confused or insulted by this unconventional teaching, recognized that he had witnessed something far more valuable than any lecture. The flute's note had pointed directly to the same undivided awareness that the Buddha had described in his final teaching. It was a sound that emerged from emptiness, manifested briefly in the realm of form, and dissolved back into the boundless silence from which it came. This wasn't mystical symbolism, but a practical demonstration of how experience actually occurs in every moment. Thoughts arise from mental silence and return to silence. Emotions emerge from inner stillness and dissolve back into peace. Even our sense of being a separate self appears within awareness and ultimately resolves into the unity that was never actually broken. In the same era when Kakua was teaching through silence and single notes, another profound demonstration of unity was occurring through the acute perception of a man who had lost his physical sight, but gained something far more valuable. This blind man lived near the temple where the master Bankei taught, and his unusual sensitivity would reveal something remarkable about the difference between hearing words and perceiving truth. His story shows how authentic wisdom expresses itself in ways that transcend the content of any particular teaching. Because of his blindness, this man had developed extraordinary sensitivity to the subtle qualities of human speech. Unable to judge people by their appearance or be distracted by visual cues, he had learned to hear directly into the heart of whatever anyone expressed. Over years of careful listening, he had discovered that most human communication contains hidden layers of meaning that contradict the surface message. "Since I cannot watch people's faces," he explained to a friend, "I must judge character by the sound of voice alone. Ordinarily, when I hear someone congratulate another upon their happiness or success, I also hear a secret tone of envy threading through their words. When condolences are expressed for someone's misfortune, I can detect pleasure and satisfaction, as if the speaker is secretly glad that someone else's difficulties make their own situations seem better by comparison. This penetrating awareness had made him somewhat cynical about human nature. He had learned to expect that people's public expressions would be contradicted by private feelings. Kindness often masked competition. Sympathy frequently concealed schadenfreude. Congratulations regularly hid resentment. But when he listened to Bankei's voice, something completely different emerged. In all my experience, the blind man marveled. Bankei's voice was always sincere. Whenever he expressed happiness, I heard nothing but happiness. Whenever he expressed sorrow, sorrow was all I heard. There were no hidden agendas, no contradictory undertones, no gap between what he said and what he felt. This testimony reveals something profound about what happens when consciousness becomes unified. Bankei had achieved such complete integration that his thoughts, feelings, words, and actions arose from the same undivided source. He had transcended the internal conflicts that create the duplicity the blind man detected in most people. When we operate from unity consciousness, there is no gap between our public persona and our private experience. We don't need to manage different versions of ourselves for different audiences, because there is only one authentic self, expressing itself appropriately in each situation. This doesn't mean we become naive or lose the ability to understand social context. Rather, we respond to each circumstance with such natural wisdom that pretense becomes unnecessary. As we reach the end of our journey through these timeless stories, we can see how each tale has been pointing toward the same fundamental recognition. Whether it was Nanin's empty cup, Hakuin's, "Is that so?" Gudo's compassion for the gambling husband, or Subuti's wordless teaching, every story has revealed different facets of the same underlying truth. Consciousness is already unified. We simply need to stop creating the illusion of separation. The Zen masters whose wisdom we've encountered didn't achieve some extraordinary state that made them different from ordinary human beings. They simply recognized what the Buddha pointed to in his final teaching, that the awareness in which all experiences arise is itself beyond birth and death, beyond success and failure, beyond seeking and finding. This recognition doesn't solve all practical problems or eliminate the natural challenges of human existence, but it provides an unshakable foundation of peace that remains stable regardless of what circumstances might appear. In recognizing this unity, we discover that every moment of our lives has been a teaching, every person we've encountered has been a teacher, and every experience we've had has been perfectly designed to guide us toward this recognition. The confusion we've experienced wasn't a mistake, but an invitation to look deeper. The suffering we've endured wasn't punishment, but a signal that we were looking for happiness in temporary things. The joy we felt wasn't separate from us, but a glimpse of our natural state. Like the Buddha's final breath, like Kikua's single note, like the sincerity that flowed through Bankei's voice. This recognition is both the most extraordinary discovery possible and the most natural thing in the world. It has been present all along, waiting patiently for us to stop looking elsewhere and notice what was never hidden. As you rest now in the silence that follows these words, you might sense something that has been listening to every story, witnessing every teaching, remaining peacefully present through every moment of this journey. That awareness is not separate from who you are. It is who you are. It is the same consciousness that looked through the Buddha's eyes, that spoke through the Zen master's voices, and that recognizes itself in this very moment as the source and destination of all seeking. In this recognition, the circle completes itself. Seeker and sought are revealed as one. Teacher and student dissolve into the same understanding. All the stories resolve into the storyless awareness that has been present from the beginning, dreaming itself into endless forms, while never leaving its natural state of perfect peace. This is the ultimate teaching, beyond all teachings. This is the final story, in which every story finds its completion. Rest here, in the unity that was never broken, as consciousness recognizes itself as both the journey and the destination, both the question and the answer, both the dreamer and the dream. Welcome home.